everybody. I'm going to do a quick mic check here. So I need everyone in the comments to let me know how the mic sounds. You can pull it up in there?
I'm pulling it up. Yeah, on my phone.
Oh, there we go. We got.
I'm listening to an ad right now.
Yeah. So yeah, we got that other mic over there. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. So of course you guys know I'm here at CJTV. I appreciate you guys joining with us today. Share the stream. We're live in Kenosha right now. Just about 2 minutes from the courthouse, which is right outside, where a small group of people have gathered. Not a ton. Nothing like what people were anticipating. Granted, we are early in the day right now. It's only 1:30. The verdict has not come out. The jury is still deliberating, so we still have some time to take this opportunity to do a sidebar here, a breakout session with some guys that are all familiar faces. We've seen each other all around the country, different places, independently, kind of roaming the nation, trying to find the best video angle, the best photo angle, the best opportunity to capture what's happening in the streets. With I think we all kind of maintain that like an unbiased standard of like just showing everybody what's happening, and you can go ahead and be as biased as you want, which is fine. But I'm gonna let everyone introduce themselves. I'll go through here.
Yeah, Kristan Harris with the Rundown Live. I do talk radio 5 days a week. You guys know how to find it. Just search podcasting apps or whatever. But also the rundownlive.com. I caught a lot of extensive footage in Kenosha. So I was subpoenaed in the middle of the trial. I was sitting 2 rows behind the prosecution, and when he was talking about subpoenaing me, and I'm like looking around the courtroom. I'm like, how long till they figure out I'm sitting right here in the courtroom while I got subpoenaed while in court? And as many of you guys know, there's history. I took the stand, but there's a lot of amazing individuals in this room, and I'm really honored to be sharing the floor here with CJ Halliburton, and I'm going to let this next person introduce his awesomeness. Here you go.
Thank you so much. My name is Gutenschwager, also known as BG on the Scene. I am an independent reporter that has been covering protests, rallies, breaking news, pretty much anything you can name that's outside and there's something to cover, inside even sometimes. It's been a very busy last couple of years, and it's been quite a journey seeing what's been going on out in this country and sharing that with the world, showing people the truth about what's going on, and just trying to give people accurate reporting from some of these really, volatile or complex situations that definitely seem to stir up a lot of discussion on a national level and also a local level. And so I just try to bring firsthand perspective of media and just kind of objective coverage of what's going on, and letting people then take the facts and just go from there.
So I'm Ford Fischer. I think I'm the only one who is here who was not actually there the night of the Rittenhouse shooting. I had a freelancer filming for me that night named Kristan, so I want to make sure that all credit to him for my actual footage from that event. But basically I travel the country, sort of similar to as they described. I collect raw footage and live stream of activist situations, and for the most part don't really offer commentary. Like me talking on camera like this is fairly unique for me. It's actually not something I spend a lot of time doing.
Super exclusive stuff happening.
Super exclusive. Truly.
And so it's really for me a lot more about documenting what happens, and then having a truthful account of how situations went.
Right. Which is, you mentioned, before you go off, let me ask you, so what got you into what you're doing now? What brought you onto the field of video journalism?
Yeah, I originally started actually while I was in college. I kind of focused on activism when the Black Lives Matter sort of movement began, 2014, 2015, the situation in Ferguson and Baltimore at that time. And activism has really crossed into different generations since then, right? This situation I feel like it's almost the third iteration since then of there was the original Black Lives Matter, and then kind of the focus of social justice activism really changed leading into the Trump administration and kind of opposing the alt-right that came about at the beginning of the Trump admin. And then as the right kind of changed, as the right sort of shifted, so too the social justice activism changed, particularly of course following the death of George Floyd, and then following through Jacob Blake obviously led to the situation that we had in Kenosha. So, seeing the evolution of movements I think is really important.
Sorry, we were in studio and there's always unique moments here, like the intro.
We just.
Real fast before you get there, right? Gotcha. Now you mentioned one of the things that distinguishes you a little bit different from the three of us here is that while you had a representation of your company in Kenosha during the riots, the three of us were there, but you were intimately involved in that, as you said, a lot of the social justice movement as it's been. You've been around a lot of these things, but more notably, you mentioned two big names, right? The one that directly stemmed the events that are in trial right now, which is Jacob Blake shooting, but you had very intimate involvement with George Floyd in the events there. Would you walk us through that for a second?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I am based in Washington D.C. and basically following the death of George Floyd, activism in D.C. had basically come to a total halt during COVID. Residents of D.C. took the pandemic extremely seriously. Not leaving the house for anything, and so that movement brought people out for the first time again, and so I remember feeling like it's like weird looking around and there's a crowd, right? Like
It's kind of like again. Through the light.
But like I was saying about generations changing, I mean the particular activists who came out for the sort of movement for George Floyd were new faces, right? They were not actually largely part of like an organized Black Lives Matter movement. They were not particularly organized at all. It was people who were organically upset and responding, and I think that's probably informative for much of the social unrest that followed in the rest of 2020. As it seems following through to Kenosha.
Sure. I mean, did you see much of a change, like the diversity in the protesters, the people that came out, that were active out during demonstrations and protests?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably a relaxing of the use of like symbols, like less of the three arrows pointing down, less of like the actual hashtag Black Lives Matter being attached to it necessarily, right? I mean, that still existed, but at least in that initial response, like people just organically like furious about what they saw in the video of George Floyd's death. Those people came out, and that's street clothes, right? Like those are, for lack of a better word, like normal people, not organized activists, not people who could be categorized as activists on any normal day.
Right. Just people that had, and what I keep talking about, and I want to hear from both of you guys as well. But one of the things we've seen is that there is a difference in a lot of the demonstration, the groupings. You have people that are very much, they're going out and they're going to be at, and you've probably seen a lot of the same people. I see a lot of the same people, even in different states, at different rallies, protests, demonstrations, what have you. But one of the things you've seen a lot more now is then you have people that really just want to they have something to say. They're really personally attached to the situations at hand, especially locally, right? Like in a demographic scale, we were talking about Louisville. I think we all have kind of our own like experience in Louisville, what that was like. And then we were talking about this last night when we walked around, how even here in Kenosha, at the gas station, there's a lot of talk about the AR-15 that Kyle Rittenhouse had, right? I'm sure you saw this. One of the things that wasn't really talked about is how many guns were there, how many people were like out there in whatever form they felt was appropriate for them to be there. But there was a lot of guns and a lot of people that had a lot of raw emotion that were there connected to that moment, right? Connected to the city. It was much like what we saw when I first got to Kenosha at the police station. Andrew and I first got in, we drove in from Chicago a couple hours after Jacob got shot, not even a couple hours. And it was basically like family and friends. It wasn't like an organized protest. It was people from the community who had made their way to the police station. They were angry. There was a lot of tears in the crowd. You don't see that a lot. You know what I mean? Like, not a lot of people that are just so emotionally like connected to what they're doing there that it becomes very personal to the point where they were like grabbing the shields of the police and like yelling at the individual officers. And I think a lot of them knew the officers themselves too because it's all so local. But yeah. So Brandon, what about you? What got you into? You can grab that mic there if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
What got you out? What brought you out?
Well, I've been interested in covering just the whole protest scene for about 5 years now, going back to 2016. Had seen, at the time I was in New York, I had seen a lot of the protests that came in the aftermath of Donald Trump's election. Prior to that, I had been going out on the campaign trail and checking out the political rallies themselves. So I went to different Trump rallies, Bernie Sanders rallies, Hillary Clinton rallies, just kind of getting a feel for what all was going on. And then once Trump was elected, there was a swift backlash backlash in New York, because that was definitely a stronghold that had voted against him. So there were large demonstrations in the street. They would march over to Trump Tower, and I remember just being really interested in that sort of like quick reaction to it, and the way that people then like organized these events, marching through cities. Wasn't really something I was super familiar with as a young person, like growing up, because I grew up in a suburb of Detroit, and so it really wasn't like that there. Like there really weren't many moments where people would go out and protest, or have, certainly not mass demonstrations with like thousands, and that's how it was in New York at the time. And so I kind of just kept an ear out for stuff of that nature for quite a while. Really in 2020, once the pandemic had hit, the whole dynamic really shifted, and things shifted for me from a work perspective. Michigan actually ended up being one of the first places that ever had an anti-lockdown protest, and that happened at the Michigan State Capitol, and there were so few press there covering it up close. Part of that was because of the pandemic itself. Like the networks were concerned about sending their reporters out into these sorts of spaces with people and large crowds, because they just, at the time, this is April of 2020, it was still really unfamiliar, and people weren't quite sure what to do with regards to like social distancing and mass crowds of that nature. But I was interested in covering this stuff, and that one in particular was fairly close to me, so I really wanted to go out and see what was going on. And from there ended up being subsequent demonstrations, and I was really interested in continuing with that story and following that through, and so I did throughout the end of April there going into May. And then with the death of George Floyd, that ignited a whole another set of demonstrations for a whole different reason. And so then basically just went right into that. I went to Minneapolis, went to DC actually after Minneapolis, and so I saw some of the demonstrations that Ford referenced there. And it really just continued through. It was extremely busy throughout 2020, as I'm sure all of you know, and basically just hitting the pavement over and over again, getting out there to go cover these things. And eventually that would lead me to Kenosha, among many other places, and everything that happened there.
Right. I appreciate that. Now, and Kristan, like you go a little bit further back than I think I didn't realize. Like your roots in this go back. You've been doing kind of like deep dive, maybe too deep apparently. Like stuff. So walk us through your back in.
My coverage of protests probably started about 10 years ago. The March Against Monsanto, which was huge here in Milwaukee. I know thousands of people would come out and march. That's where I met Corey Elijah and some of the people that were documenting here in 2020. Covered countless activists and demonstrations of all sorts, and I decided the best way to bring the most natural news is to cover everything. That means if it's independent or if it's conservative or liberal or it has some label, I generally try to cover it. I know that that's controversial, as everyone in here, nobody knows what to make of any of us because we cover everything. And the real reason we're out there is we just want to bring the genuine raw news for you guys out there so we can get it out there before the mainstream media can propagandize it. And so that's what the Rundown Live started out with, as it started out as a podcast, talk radio show, live streaming, where we had one guy, which was Mike from the Occupy movement, and me from the Ron Paul movement, to show that we could put aside our differences and that there's things we have in common, like auditing the Federal Reserve, Monsanto, GMO. We all want healthy food that isn't Franken food. They're like civil liberties and our rights to be able to do what we want with our bodies, things like that. And over the years it evolved, and obviously 2016 was a big year for protests. I was at the RNC when they had flag burning and all chaos broke out. There was the DNC as well as other things I've covered over the years. And of course, once everyone got furloughed, people, like you guys mentioned, they were all locked in their house just waiting for a reason to get out. And we all saw the George Floyd videos, so I decided to make my way to Minneapolis, not knowing anyone. And that day I got some viral footage, had 20,000 people in the stream, never have had that many since. and I got viral footage of the 3rd Precinct being burnt down. And I wanted to be there to capture the information. The mainstream media was being targeted in Minneapolis.
Right.
They said that they wanted this is a story to be told by streamers, because I believe that the BLM organization and a lot of the affiliates, they wanted the raw information, like not the propagandized stuff. They want people to see what's really going on.
Sure.
So I was there for that, and then when I was heading home, I saw that Corey Elijah was live, and he was skateboarding, and he was getting 15, 20,000, like just a ridiculous amount of viewership, and he's going out there and showing his community that everything is safe. Everyone has heard about what's happening around the country, and it was amazing to see just other people around me take action to bring genuine news, because that's something I'm passionate about. That's why we all kind of share a bond.
Absolutely.
We went and covered what happened in Kenosha. So within like an hour of Jacob Blake being shot, I packed up my my gear, which is backpack. You got your goggles, your face mask, all that stuff.
Put on your Ford here, in which case you have like a jetpack.
Yeah.
No, I do have a bulletproof vest in his car.
Ford's like, he's like 3.4.5.0.
I call him the human target. Shot 3 times.
Jeez.
But
Can't deny though, right?
dark humor. But nonetheless, Kenosha is a bonding experience for us all, because we were all there, and so obviously I got some viral footage. I got a law enforcement officer getting knocked out by a brick in Kenosha on the first day, and before I got home, everyone was blowing me up. People I've never heard of, mainstream media outlets, and licensing companies, you name it. And I didn't get sleep for a couple days, obviously, and Monday and Tuesday night, and came around. And Tuesday, obviously, was a very eventful day, and I'll let one of you guys start that story, but as you know, I'm out there and I didn't want anyone hurt, and I think that the Rundown Live has not been about spreading hate or disinformation, but having civil conversations about difficult topics, because it doesn't seem like we can have civil conversations with people anymore. It seems like they're really quick to label you or identify you or judge you, when they're the same people that are not wanting to be judged themselves. So it's really interesting to see how the controlling of definition of words, the fact that if I covered BLM for 30 days and I covered one Proud Boy event, all of a sudden you're a Proud Boy, but that nothing could be further from the truth. I'm just documenting the information. It's crazy.
Gospel. His lips to God's ears. Hear what he's saying.
All right. I'm just saying, just because you interview people and you talk to people that don't have the same viewpoints, that doesn't mean that's who you are. Right. And everyone wants to identify you because you maybe talk to somebody of a different political viewpoint. Well, how are we all supposed to put aside our differences and learn to be more cohesive if we're not allowed to even have friends or have conversations that are well researched? Because most people won't change their name overnight, or not their name, their mind overnight. Excuse me. Right? It's a process. You hear it, you're like, and after a while, you're like, you hear somebody else, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll look into it a little deeper, and you're like, oh man, maybe I was wrong about this. Sometimes you just don't know, and
what
it's
do you
okay.
think about that? Because it's funny, I think a lot of people, like, at this point, when you get older, like, you don't even really change your mind almost. You just kind of like, you kind of deviate a little bit from what your core is, right? Because you're not usually unshook, I would imagine, right? Like, a lot of things that go into, like, what make us who we are, right, are your ethos, like the base core of your being, right? Like your soul's real trajectory or journey, whatever that might be. I don't feel like most people, I would say the vast majority are the garbage bag human beings, you know what I mean? Like we're on a good path and we just kind of figure out a way that works best with us to get there, But a lot of times people can't accept that. And it's been tough out here. And I'm sure you guys have experienced. I don't think your take on what you've seen around the country, and I know you've traveled abroad a bit too. And
yeah.
How has that been?
Yeah, in terms of what you had spoken about with people being quick to rush to judgment, particularly just with regards to if you happen to be present at an event covering it. And this is something that has been a constant challenge when I would go, and it's interesting because it seems to be that it's almost based on like what was the most high profile of coverage or what was the most recent, like in bulk. So if you go out, for example, and like weeks on end, it's all Black Lives Matter protests or something of that nature, and then go to cover some type of right-wing event, something of that nature, then people there are saying, oh, you're with this crowd, you're with them. why are you here? And the exact flip is true, that if you went and covered a bunch of right-wing events and then happened to go to something that's more of like a left-leaning aligned event, then they say, oh, well, you were here at this event and you were covering, but well, they don't even make the distinction between covering and just being present at it. They're like, you were present at this event, and so for that reason,
But
You're bad.
you're bad, yeah, basically, and it's really unfortunate because there was one incident in Detroit where I was actually physically attacked specifically because of that. They said you were there on January 6th, like, you are basically the most evil thing we've ever encountered, like, and go and physically attack me. And that was a really difficult thing to experience, just because, like, I've always done everything in my power to try to be fair with the coverage and to try to cover a variety of events, because I think that there's so much going on that to limit oneself to just, oh, we're only going to cover this type of protest, or we're only going to cover this type of group, we're only going to go to people that have these leaning beliefs, that way, it's all in the same category. I don't want any of that. Like
that's very biased coverage.
Right.
But it's hard though, and Ford, I'd like to hear your take on it too. It's hard though, because like, safety's a concern. Like when you're out there, safety's a concern.
For sure. I mean, this has kind of happened to me in both directions, and it's honestly not something I want to like belabor a ton, but like on your point about people changing their minds, there's a world changing out there, right? So objectively covering the timeline of actual events that occurs, like the world changes in front of you, right? There was a time when Kyle Rittenhouse was not a known name, and then he killed 2 people and injured a third, and now people can debate over, basically was it a crime, was it right or wrong, should he have been there in the first place, those sorts of things. I personally don't take any position like on that question, but I'm extremely glad that I had a freelancer there who was able to film it, and I'm extremely glad that you guys were there to actually witness it happen. But it's interesting how with something like that, even though the facts of what happened are very much on camera, there's only one way that it did happen, but you have multiple angles that people can show and present their facts in different ways, and at this exact moment, right, a jury of 12 people is going to determine the future of a person's life based on how they ended up interpreting those things.
And it's our footage too.
Yeah, and it's your footage, so I definitely want to hear from you guys on that. Like, what do you like? To the meat and potatoes of the thing, like.
Yeah, let's jump into it, because that's really people are curious. So the footage that we're talking about, right on point here, is like, and again, you guys, we've got News to Share, BG on the Scene, the Rundown Live, and CJTV, amongst many others who were present. I mean, we mentioned some of those names: Ricardo, Reggie Condito, Corey Elijah. You had, Richie McGinnis was there. There all these, a ton. There's more that I'm missing. So I know I'm missing.
Hernandez,
absolutely.
And Richie McGinnis, I have to say, is in a very interesting position. It would have been fascinating to have him in this conversation because, in his case, Rittenhouse is charged in part based on the notion that he could have endangered.
First degree reckless endangerment.
Right.
Yeah.
He could catch a decade in prison because of the presence of a journalist who theoretically could have been struck by Kyle's bullets. Although that didn't happen.
Right.
That's what he's charged for.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure that I'm sure he'd love to be here too. But obviously he is very intimately involved in this case. He can't really talk about it. But that being said, as far as
Kristan's looking around like, wait, what? To anybody who doesn't realize, he was a witness in the case.
Well,
I feel like
we're done at this point. Yeah, I think at this point you're good to talk about the case.
Well, nobody put a gag order on me per se, so I can talk about whatever.
And they couldn't, even if they wanted to.
You're right. This man will not be gagged.
All right, guys.
Yeah,
that's enough talking about gagging.
Right? Yeah. Unless it doesn't have a zip up on it. No. But you mentioned it. So, independent journalist, gunshots. It takes us to that night. Which is in trial right now, right? And like you said, there's a kid, 17, 8-year-old kid, that is right now his whole life, his entire life, right? I mean, I think the combination of the charges originally, as they were set forth with the full entirety with gun enhancements, was like 165 years for those charges, and then one of them alone was a life sentence. So I mean, you're looking down the barrel, I mean, so to speak, of life and 165 years. And then maybe a $250 fine, and I think 9 months in jail for curfew violations. Sure, benign, obviously. But then there was gunshots, right? And people died, and someone nearly lost her life, Gage Groskowitz, and we all were there. We had footage, we had people representing us there. So let's talk about that. Let's get into it. Like, Brandon, why don't you jump into that and tell us? Yeah, walk us through that.
Take us to the scene, BG on the scene.
So that scene, there were many scenes, and that scene was a pretty unforgettable one. It was such a practically indescribable atmosphere going into Kenosha, because we had seen riots before. There was definitely the familiarity with that sort of like volatile reaction to an incident of some kind, whether that be a police killing or in this case a police shooting. But there was something about Kenosha that was just particularly poignant. The way that it would just like went right through the neighborhoods, the marches, like right by people's houses, and it, all the buildings that were involved in terms of like what ended up being like, burned down and whatnot. These are fairly small structures. So, and the reason I bring all this up is because it's a huge contrast between, say, Portland or DC or some of these other cities that kind of like get repetitively brought up in the news. It's definitely much more of a, there's like chain restaurants and things like that.
Right.
You have more establishments like that, high-rise buildings, and so it's kind of like just a different dynamic. I just want to emphasize that Kenosha, even though it does have a population of 100,000, I know we talked about this a little bit last night, but just to kind of reiterate the point that it does have that small town feel, especially if you walk around here, like the downtown area, the uptown area, like you don't get the feeling of, oh wow, like we're in the big city, we're in, not at all. And so just that alone, like it definitely had a different atmosphere and a different feel to it just going into it. And seeing the way how quickly things unfolded, I mean, it was peaceful marches during the afternoon and getting into the early evening, but then as night set, it was clashes with police, it was people facing off with these lines of officers and riot gear, and then ultimately getting dispersed away from the courthouse and then basically free roaming through the city. Many people then took to looting or arson and smashing windows, things like that, and it all sprang up so quickly. Like everything about that was just this quick reaction to what had happened with Jacob Blake, and so it was hard to process.
Right.
And another point that I know I made last night, kind of expand on a little bit, is that it was hard to get a full feel for everything because there was so much going on that like any one person could only have one perspective from it. And there were too many different things to react to. Like you could hear the sound of a gun going off, and that happened many, many times throughout. But it's like in some direction or in some way you don't even like see where it's at. And so it's just like, do you react to it? Do you just kind of like keep walking as you were?
Yeah.
Like, and it would happen multiple times. So I don't want to say got used to it, but like you couldn't necessarily dive in on every single thing that you heard or witnessed or experienced just because there was just too much of it.
Real sensory overload.
Sensory overload,
Right,
yeah.
Totally, yeah. Now,
So-
someone in the comments over here, Rodney Drew Jr. Asked, was there, one of the things that came to the case is the re-rack of his AR-15. Did you see that? Did you experience that? Was that something that, and again, it's going to be tough to recall all the minor details.
Yeah. That's something I would really have to review that in detail.
Sure.
On it, because I know this is a point that's gotten brought up a lot and a
Sure.
lot. So I do personally want to do like a deep dive on that and perhaps even like ask some people that have a bit more expertise on that to really dissect it and know for sure.
Right.
So at this moment, I truly cannot say one way or another on that.
Right.
Yeah.
What about you? I know it's not a huge deal, but it's come up several times in questions because you guys, I mean, you guys had we all had our own angle, but like the footage that was used in both your footage was used so extensively.
Yeah.
If you guys don't recall, and let them know, so you were in the courtroom watching court, and your footage came up, and you guys remember they did a pause. They said, all right, we're gonna do a timeout out here, and they're like, well, we can't really use this footage because we can't.
Hearsay.
It's hearsay. They had the whole hearsay. They started quoting the Bible, and it turned into a real big thing. Judge Schroeder really went into it. But what got me was that someone from a major media outlet, like I think they got a hold of the courts, and they're like, well, he's sitting right there.
We don't know for sure how they found it, but I'm sure with TV, I was getting tweets from people laughing. They're like, "You're a few pews behind the prosecution." Obviously they didn't want the narration because of the way I painted the pictures, and they wanted to give it as a narration of what Kyle Rittenhouse was experiencing at the time.
Sure.
So, and to be honest, I don't know what Kyle was thinking.
No,
I know, and he was near me, but he wasn't like, I wasn't holding, hands with the dude, per se. He wasn't right next or attached to me. But I do have something interesting or insight on the re-racking issue. If there's a re-rack, that means it would have dispersed a fully loaded full metal jacket bullet.
Right.
And every bullet casing was recovered, and there was no fully, unused full metal jacket, which makes me think that most likely there was no re-rack.
Right.
But, I wasn't there. I was within like 80, 100 feet from the second and third shooting.
It felt a lot closer though, didn't it?
It felt, well, than on the camera?
Right.
Absolutely.
You see it on camera, it feels like you're a mile away, but.
And to Brandon's point, we were dealing with industrial grade fireworks going off all the time. We're black, and then to very basic things to black cats, M80 rounds, quarter sticks of dynamite, people with slingshots, tons of people were armed with the most ridiculous thing, like it was the purge. All of a sudden 8 o'clock, the alarm came off.
That's exactly what I said.
The
purge.
The alarm happened at 8 o'clock to let us know there's curfew, and everyone came out. It was like letting everyone know it was time to protest.
It was like they opened the gates and everyone's like, all right.
And people were armed with like table legs, and just like broom handles and broomsticks and axe handles, and just it was just weird. It was bizarre to me. People had shields and everything. It was like they were ready for war. And I know that I'm on files saying that it was an urban war zone, but that's the only way I know of describing that situation.
Absolutely.
Because it was just hectic. It was just hectic that day. So I'm not quite sure about the re-rack. I would say there's not enough evidence to support that. But normally, a re-rack would have fired a fully, available cartridge or an extra blank. So there would have been additional cartridges either way.
Sure.
So.
You mean ejected it, not fired it?
Correct. Not fired it, but ejected it.
Right.
Apologize.
Get it right.
No, I just wanted to say that for clarity. I know that my audience is like a lot of them really like guns, and one of them's gonna be like, "What the hell did you say?"
I'm not a gun guy, but I just wanted to give you guys that. There's a lot of people that want to believe that the problem is people aren't able to put aside their tribalism when it comes to this topic. There's a lot of people very heavily involved in like Wisconsin. We have the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears. Right, they got their team, and their team is the best no matter what you argue it, right?
Well, no, they're a lot better than the Hawks the other day. Jeez.
But the reality is like if we're not willing to take a look at the evidence, and the problem is testimonies can be fraudulent.
Absolutely.
So we have to deal with the evidence, and the evidence is the video footage. That's what we have that's absolute. Even when they've asked me questions on the stand that I may have heard something or I didn't hear something, if I didn't have it on video, I didn't want to repeat that because there's no way to substantiate that. That's why claims of re-rack, that's just a testimony. That doesn't mean, legitimately it happened. If we never had Kyle Rittenhouse on video saying that he was a medic, we could argue that he never said he was a medic. But obviously he lied. He admitted to lying in court. I don't know whether or not if his testimony was genuine or not, other than what I saw and I experienced while filming him. So I only spoke to the best of the things I was knowledgeable about because I did not want to give disinformation. This is somebody's life on the line. And I'm not saying I support or am against the trial. I have no horse in the race. I just want there to be a genuine trial with honest information. And I think, like I've told you guys before, there's a reason why the assistant district attorney handled it. If this was an open and closed shut case, the DA handles it. He should be handling it anyways because it's such a big conversation. And most people don't realize that these are assistant district attorneys handling this.
Right.
Probably because they didn't have enough evidence to support all their charges from what we're seeing. But we don't know. I'm not a jury judge. But that's the way I played out because if the DA is going to win it open and closed, he takes the case because that is a big ribbon on his shoulder or belt. So that's just I don't give my opinion much. But that's just some thoughts that go through my mind.
Yeah, no, it's
Can
good.
I ask you a question, Kristan?
Yeah.
how did you feel about sort of the difference of like, essentially when you cover something, when you're live streaming something, you're giving a portrayal of that situation, right? Vis-a-vis video, live stream, like the conversation we're having right now is being broadcast to people. Sitting on a stand is really different, obviously, but how do you sort of draw the line? Like, how did it feel different?
Yeah.
Did you, in other words, maybe, did you still feel like a journalist on the stage, or did you feel like a witness, or can you be both of those
It
things?
was a good question. Yeah.
Ooh, well, when I took stage, all I could think about is making sure I give the most genuine and honest, information that people could go fact check and verify that I'm giving proper information. So I
Were you
would say-
nervous about your recall in that moment? Like, were you nervous that you might slip up just due to the stress factor?
Well, listen, I was worried about, I wasn't having an anxiety attack, but I'd be like, this is about the time I'd have an anxiety attack and break down.
Keep going.
So I'm just saying,
I would imagine, yeah.
it's a lot, because you guys have been there, there's like PTSD involved in these things.
Sure.
Like I didn't want anyone to die. No one had to die that day.
No.
Like that's the most tragic thing is like, why did law enforcement push all the protesters in that direction? They had 360 degrees to work with. I'm not law enforcement, but that's a question I have to ask. And obviously this is a great example. The only reason why Kyle Rittenhouse is on trial is because government failed to be able to keep the neighborhood safe. So the biggest failure here is government. But while taking the stand, I spoke fast. I guess I was a little nervous, more so because it was a big event and somebody's life was on the line, and I didn't want to give misinformation. And as you know, the prosecution is the one who called me to testify. I wasn't the defense.
Right.
So obviously they were using it in order to try to convict Kyle Rittenhouse. So I don't have a horse in the race one way or another, and I felt like if I could give an honest testimony and it could help the jurors make a good decision, then I'm going to take the stand, and it's okay. I don't mind that it's a prosecution, so.
Because you said some things in your video when the first guy at the dumpster was like screaming, like fuck around and find out, and you were like, hey man, you need to chill out. Like you weren't policing the crowd at any point. People wanted to get that point clear. You were making it clear, like, hey man, you do realize like safety evolved, like you're putting yourself in harm's way, a lot of people by inciting that type of energy rise, right?
Right.
But the thing about that is that like you at that point are like, you're out there, right? But you're not working for the prosecution, you're not working for the defense, but what you saw how you saw it, though, right?
Right.
And it's tough, I would imagine, because we all say we're unbiased, right? I run heavy and hard in that, and I say I'm unbiased. And I try to make it clear I'm very unbiased in how I present things, because I want you to have, people to have, the full opportunity to just hear it and experience it and make their own assessment as to what they've processed. But we all have our own opinions, right? We've all got our own life experience that has taken us in a direction that we can feel a certain way. And you mentioned like things like PTSD. I know when I hear loud noises, immediately I'm kind of like, oh shoot, I get nervous. There's certain things that trigger me, and in that it kind of has cultivated a lot of the things that I see when I think about in my multiple decades of existence, like that have brought me to where I'm at. The cultural immersion that I had as a kid, and, being in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, having the different experiences we all have. So it'd be impossible to say that you don't have your own opinions and a bias of some type. But I think where we have to draw a hard line, and I'm curious because that's a great question, is in those moments, how do you really truly turn that off and become a fact machine? And it's difficult. You're following a case right now that's incredibly deep rooted.
Yeah, I don't want to go super.
You don't have to.
But that, that's the Sines v. Kessler case, which plaintiffs. This is the people suing the organizers of the Charlottesville rally. So again, a little bit distant from here, but it's been weird to see that my footage has been used, called on by both sides at the trial. Plaintiffs included me on a witness list. Apparently, a defendant had me on the witness list today, but I'm in Wisconsin. I'm not going to Virginia right now.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting because it's a different role. It's a different application of footage, and I guess for me, I'm glad to see that, like in the Rittenhouse case, my footage that was shot by my freelancer was able to be invoked by both sides of that, and I hope that it brings. Again, people closer to the jury, closer to an understanding of truth. Right. And that sincerely doesn't come with the hope on my part of the verdict going in any direction. I hope that the verdict is simply more well-informed based on what jurors got to see of my contractor's work. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're representing, but I haven't heard from you, BG. What are your thoughts on that? Because your footage was used very prominently.
Yes.
Quite a bit, yeah.
And it's a very similar take. You said it really well right there, that I hope it brings greater clarity to what happened. Because, as I mentioned earlier, how like any one person could have only seen so much, that's also part of the problem with trying to analyze and get a full picture for what happened that night is, for the most part, most people were either not present at all for any of this, or present for the first shooting, or present for the set of second and third shootings. Right. But to have a full knowledge on everything that happened from start to finish, what caused it in the first place, what led to this, what led to that, is extremely, extremely difficult. And so that is where I think the footage plays the greatest role, is in just bridging the gap to be able to bring greater clarity. So regardless of what the outcome is, it's not tied to that at all. It's can this content bring greater truth to the people that ultimately have to make the decision? And that's where I think the most important part lies there. Personal opinion on it, it's almost irrelevant, because nobody here is making that decision. Nobody here is on the jury, has any influence on what goes on right now there. And so I think that the important part is the work as it was originally done was so truthful, it was so objective or unbiased in terms of like bringing what it brought to people that weren't there to be able to understand it. And I think that the way that that's been put together it's definitely opened up a lot more that people didn't understand previously and weren't aware of.
Yeah. I have two questions for all of you guys actually. So in this case, all of our footage was very well used throughout the case, right? In some way, and plus amongst others. That footage removed, what type of case would we be looking at? And do you feel at this point, with how much exposure this case has on an international scale, as we were talking about last night, I just got a call from France while we were talking. Like, there's foreign entities that are watching America. Like, how are they going to handle this? Because they've been watching and it's been happening all over the world. They've had things happening here, but America, it's been kind of the epicenter for so many big things that have happened in the last couple of years. Do you feel that the American people right now are ready to accept the verdict and move on, regardless? Life in prison, time served, no time served, whatever. And do you think that this case is going to alter the way that court cases moving forward are going to operate, with the radical amount of influx of all of this independent journalism that was out there? So stemming back to the first question, without our footage and the footage of other people, like we mentioned, what kind of case are we looking at?
You want to start?
I'm gonna pass around all of you.
I can't. It's very hard for me to imagine how any trial like this would happen with zero footage at all. But clearly the presence of independent journalists made it so that there was a lot more clarity about like timeline of events. I mean, the thing that it brings to mind for me is that it seems like a really integral part of the prosecution's case is based on the idea that there was provocation based on Kyle Rittenhouse sort of pointing the rifle, but their image in that is very much in dispute, right? Like, whereas a lot of the facts of the case, Kyle's the one who shot them, right? Or not really in dispute, and it's a dispute about sort of interpretation of those events. Sure. This is a moment where we have an image that the prosecution is saying shows one thing, and the defense is saying it does not show that thing. Right. And that is fundamentally a result of a lack of high quality video of that exact epoch in time. With that being said, if there were not guys like you guys and my freelancer who are out there, that's all there would be, is these little grainy moments, if even that, right? Right. So, I mean, for me, it highlights the importance of not only independent journalists, but also to the extent that law enforcement find themselves in these situations, body cameras as well, right? Basically, footage that is as up close as possible to integral moments in history, I think is really critical to understanding them, right? If the storming of the Capitol, were all four of us at that?
We all had representation there.
All four of our outlets were there. that, for example, 14,000 hours of security footage, but would we really have a good understanding of what happened there if it were not for independent journalists that were filming people as they're entering, moving with the flow of the crowd to sort of document the movement, the tone, the things that were being said, as opposed to just sort of pixels on a screen?
Right.
You know, I think I think we're entering a new world where these sorts of situations can't really be adjudicated without independent videography.
Right.
I'm glad you touched on that because that's something that I definitely wanted to at some point throughout this conversation, just in watching what footage has been brought up. And it's very telling and very interesting that it's almost all, if not completely all, just independents and independent journalists that have gone out to cover things. So I agree that I thought it really, just no matter what a person's position on the case is, it definitely highlighted the importance of that kind of reporting and of that kind of journalism. Oftentimes, the big name outlets, the mainstream ones, are a block or multiple blocks away, or may not even be present that particular night because it's already been going on for a few nights. So how different is this night of rioting versus that night of rioting? Obviously it ended up being a lot different because of what happened, but if they're kind of choosing where to apply their resources or where to send people, then that's a different sort of conversation that they're having. And so I definitely thought that it was a big highlighting of that need. And to answer your question from earlier on, like what kind of case, I think it comes down to what would have been the sort of fringe captures from 9,000 feet up in the air or wherever these other like aircraft, drones, and whatnot were located. What were they capturing, and would they have dug more into that if they didn't have footage of?
You mentioned drone footage, immediately Kristan was like, well, we can get into that. You want to talk about the FBI, we'll get into that. Take it easy, Chief.
Just in terms of like, there may be some that, it wasn't even necessarily open to interpretation from very far away drone footage zoomed in, just because there already was some coverage on the ground from certain moments. And certainly in terms of capturing any audio of like interactions, what is being said and that sort of thing, that's obviously coming from on the ground as well. So I think that it definitely highlighted those things, and it would have looked a lot different. It's truly impossible to say how it would have turned out because it's just like you would never know what things would have been introduced to try to fill the gaps, to try to.
I feel like that term hearsay would come up a ton more in this case if there wasn't video backing and audio backing. Yeah, audio and video backing, because you've got people like the car source owners that are saying one thing, and then you've got other testimonies that are coming in that are saying the complete opposite. And how hard would that be to try to deliberate, as jurors are right now, like, well, who's lying? They had more people on one side testifying to one thing than they had on theirs, but there was two car source owners, and how many witnesses? They had two on, and the group that was with Balch and then that said otherwise. Like, for me, I think the jury right now has like the toughest job, and I'm glad that we were all there. And I want to keep hearing from them, but that hearsay thing, you got to rely on testimony. But as we've seen in this case, there's a lot of personal factors that motivate people's testimonies. Not that I'm saying anyone fabricated their story, and maybe they recalled it to the best of their ability. I want to give everyone that credit. But you got, like, Gage has got a lawsuit. There's a $10 million lawsuit there, and they asked him, like, does the outcome of this case affect your lawsuit? He said, yes. I was like, wow, that's scary to think that we have 10 million reasons to make sure that things go away that's going to behoove your legal counsel in this lawsuit. The car source owners, I'm sure they're facing the potential facing of lawsuits and other things that will come that direction based off of this case. Right? So then again, their testimony might have a tendency to lean in a direction that would cater to them looking out for kind of their best interests. Right? But then we have these independent news outlets, that are, these independent media channels, these folks that are out there recording events that happen, where it's interesting because their testimony is almost where the ADA said, we were joking about this for a second, when he mentioned in final arguments, he was like, well, their testimony doesn't really matter. I just want to put them on stand and give you guys a taste of, and I couldn't even hear the rest of what he said, but I was like, well, you're right, a lot of these testimonies don't quite matter because it can be hearsay. And as a judge, through quoting Leviticus and whatever Bible verses he did from the jump, and he walked us through the hearsay case books, it comes down to just like, well, what happened? Look at it. This is what happened. and then you gotta ask simple questions, right? Like the Rittenhouse, like did you feel threatened? Did you feel like you were gonna die? You know, did he threaten your life? And then there are these little things that come into play where this court case would have been probably 7 or 8 days shorter had they not had the extensive amount of footage that we had. But
A question for all of you on that.
I didn't get to hear yours either, but yeah, keep going.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right.
It may actually, it may contribute
No, you're
to.
good, yeah, sorry.
You can answer a couple questions at
My
once.
hand is to you. Do
I was just gonna say,
this-
after having seen your footage presented in court amidst other footage and people describing what they were doing, which of course you don't have on the field there, you're just seeing the thing happen, and now it's being presented in a lot of different ways. Do you feel like your interpretation of that evening has changed based on what you've now seen at trial? Like, do you feel like your own work, the things that you saw in your own eyes and your own camera lens, has been recontextualized by the trial?
Ooh. Well, answer your question first.
Yeah.
I think we'd be looking at like some 1970s, 80s Miami Vice type situation. Obviously having evidence is the most important thing. And I think video and live streaming has changed how court systems work. It's changed in a lot of ways, just like almost as much as being able to do DNA samples and finding out people that are in jail or they're in it, they shouldn't be.
Sure.
There's actual evidence now. So if you remove that, like I remember my first interview after the shootings that happened right in front of me, the second and third one, somebody said that there was a van that opened up fire on the crowd. Like that's the first thing I heard from somebody.
Sure.
And then I heard a different story from another individual, some kid with the gun shot some people down the road. And then the third person gave me a completely different story. I have no idea how law enforcement got things right back in the day. Like, it just seems weird to me, because now we have all this technology and we have the ability to get things right. But even with the ability now to get things right, people are still divided as ever on the situation.
It's funny. Remind me to come around because I think we talked about this a little bit. I think that jumps into a lot of the protests that are happening now. It's
Yeah.
like they don't feel the police were getting it right, but there was a lot of these things that were just happening, and they're like, "But that's not what happened." And like, well, that's what we're gonna say happened.
Well,
that's how we feel it happened.
Now
And
they got
again,
body cams.
I'm
and
not
all
there,
that
but
stuff,
now
right?
and there's a lot of controversy on that, especially like with a lot of stuff that's happening. And we ran into each other out in North Carolina because of a body cam footage situation. But no, keep going. I want to hear what you said about the question that you asked.
Right,
yeah, we'll
how
get
is
to
the
that.
trial?
And then
Yeah.
what was the second question?
Well, Ford had asked, which I think is great. Like,
Oh,
How did the trial itself change your viewpoint of the events that you witnessed?
I guess when looking at it, there's a lot of things I didn't know. Like I heard what I would identify as additional gunshots,
absolutely.
but now we know that there's a handful of additional gunshots. We don't know where they came from.
Which is weird to me that this mysterious thing that of all this footage we have, thermal imaging from from 9,000 feet, and everything else is of very specific moments. Where in those moments, there's a lot of other things that were taking place that are to this point still undefined.
Yeah, and I would have to say that like it took me. I looked at this now in a very analytical way. I put aside any of my thoughts because you think you're like, well, what if this? Maybe you play all the scenarios out in your mind, and I have like what could I have done differently to prevent anyone from dying? Because I spent a lot of time with Kyle Rittenhouse. Like, what could I have said differently to this kid? And as you know, the prosecution used me warning Kyle Rittenhouse on multiple occasions not be a vigilante, to stay on his property. His job isn't to go around in the streets and police, amongst other things. I think that I had to turn all my bias and objectivity off and just work with the evidence that I had and what I saw in court. That was the biggest thing, is I turned my thought process off of the what if game and dealt with strictly evidence. And so looking at it that way is a very raw form of journalism and raw form of information. It's almost as if there's no conservative or liberal media in my mind. It's just, this is what the facts are, this is what we have to work with, versus like, I don't know how anyone, if you haven't watched the court TV videos of all the trial stuff, the odds are you have cognitive dissonance and misinformation planted in your brain, and you grow ideas from that, right?
Absolutely.
We plant crops of ideas based off of what we read and hear in our mind, and those ideas grow. So the question is what kind of seeds are we planting in our mind? And we have to work with the evidence we have, because if we start planting seeds, like if you're getting your news from Fox or CNN, you may be very indoctrinated in many different ways based on how they want to control the way you think and view this case, because they really want the division, because that's where the ratings are at the end of the day. Do they really care? Does the media really care about this trial?
Absolutely.
If there was no ratings, would any of the media be here?
Right. I counted like 10 media outlets last night, by the courthouse. I don't know how many you guys are seeing, but
That's
even,
it?
I mean,
I just went by this morning. It was like
no, I mean, this is like 9:30 at night or whatever. Everything's dead and gone, and there's just people, just these dots with their heaters and everything. But yeah, they're they thrive off of that. I mean, in all fairness, that's to your point. That's what got me into it fast, was watching what I saw on the mainstream media. I'm watching a news channel in Seattle, and they're reporting on the Occupy protests in Seattle, the Chop Chaz, and there was reports of gunmen on the roofs and burning buildings and extortions of businesses, and these checkpoints where they were checking ID, and I had to go out and see for myself, because that's a neighborhood. My first apartment was right there in that corner, and I remember going out there and just being like, this is not at all what's happening. We need to tell people what's really going on. And then it started from there. But there was the doctored images that came in from Fox and things that were like, they retracted some print.
Oh, where Fox had one photo of a guy with a rifle, and then they superimposed it onto like every
Exactly,
photo.
yeah.
And they're like, look, it's the gun guy.
Yeah, he's in a building on one of them, he's on a roof on another.
Like,
Come on,
copy-paste
man.
it.
It's all meme work. It's all meme work.
And I was like, you gotta hook me up with your Photoshop game, because obviously me and my crew don't have it down.
It wasn't even that well photoshopped. Like,
He
some of
did.
them was like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
The light's different.
He's not even looking, he didn't even pivot.
It's that hocus pocus focus, right?
Hocus pocus focus, man. Posey, that is Ford Fischer. We do love his lives.
Oh, thank you, Posey.
Speaking of Posey, right?
Yeah.
Focus, Posey. Focus.
Somebody asked in the chat, how do we know where to go?
That's a good question. But real fast, and then I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say about that, because we do end up running into each other all over the country, which is interesting. That I mean, you say, "Oh, hey, what's up, man? Here you are." We don't call him.
Was it DC? Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd be riding a bike, and I'm like, "What's up, bro?" He's got like the little bell, ching ching ching.
Yeah, I got my little live stream set up in the basket. We were riding around, but we don't call and coordinate. I mean, that's the thing. People don't. I don't know if they fully understand. Like, we don't travel in a group. Like, none of us travel in groups. I think we all hop on a plane solo. Like, I buy last minute one-way tickets and just get where I can get. But
I just use a teleporter.
yeah,
It's the running joke.
right.
I show up on these.
Yeah, Kristan actually gets carried by a drone. Like, he just gets dropped out of the pack, and he airless. He's like
Parachute,
Fortnite style, yeah, whatever.
And I fly in with a bodysuit, and I land with the camera ready to film.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Don't worry. But you know what's interesting?
That's Ford Fischer, actually. That's why we said that.
Because he's got the tech, man.
He's
got
got the
the
Iron Man suit.
I would travel by drone if they were allowed in DC.
But they don't, so he can't and he won't. So you're good. What you said was interesting, because the footage of like when they had the pickelation issue, right, with this drone footage.
Right.
That was the first time as I'm watching the case, I don't mind saying this because it doesn't affect the jury as at all. I'm watching prosecution, and I'm kind of like, they're not doing a very good job, man. Like, just in litigation, I'm like, it felt like they were really doing a phenomenal job for the defense, is what I felt as I'm watching the case. And I was very vocal about that in my stream. But then as it moved forward, I was like, the studio cat is over here.
We have a lion? You love that lion?
Please, for you, go that window. I know he's in the room.
He's got his paw from under the door. He's like,
Yeah.
give me freedom!
Yeah.
Is there one out here though?
No, he's in there trying to get out. No, right now, you're good. Poor little window there is.
He's allergic.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh,
You better act right.
I was ready to save your life there. I was gonna come like.
Are you blackmailing Ford Fischer with the
Yeah,
black
right.
cat?
Yeah, exactly.
That's my kryptonite is cat allergy.
Get him with the cat.
No, but tell the got the Iron Man suit on, you bring a cat,
Yeah.
you're just done.
But so I saw, I'm feeling it's rap. I'm like, this is a rap. I kind of felt like that, and I just felt like it was like pandering at that point. And I was like, all right, we gotta go through the motions. But then I saw that footage, and I was kind of like, that's interesting. Because I knew a lot of the case that I hadn't seen predicated on the incident with Rosenbaum, the first shooting. And the first shooting is the one that I didn't witness. I didn't see that. You know, I think all three of us here, and I'm not sure if your correspondent.
My videographer heard the first shots and then started recording, and so his first shot following the beginning of the gunfire begins with people running away and saying "What the f" from the gas station.
Right.
So
none of us, even through our footage, experienced that first.
Right, that first moment, which is really integral to the case, because you know your ability to defend yourself from a crowd chasing you is predicated on did you just murder somebody or not?
Were you an active shooter, or were you running from a defense situation? Yeah, exactly.
Or were you a reactive shooter?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that there's not closer footage of what was happening at that exact moment, but of course nobody could have the foresight to know that was about to occur.
Other than an FBI drone and whatever the drone happened to be flying in the air. I was kidding. I have no idea. But that footage came out late in the game, and I was like, wow, it's interesting. But it opened my eyes to a little bit of a new opportunity in the case for prosecution to have a leg when they were pushing that Rosenbaum didn't have a gun. Did he need to shoot him? And again, it comes down to Kyle. Did he feel like his life was in jeopardy? And he said on stand, and we got to go give him the benefit that he felt that his life was in jeopardy, and that if his gun was taken, that it would have been used against him and he'd have been killed. And so he acted the way that he did, and then subsequently Rosenbaum went down, and then cue the rest of our footage, which is us seeing that. And so from what I saw was a kid running, and what he said to me when he ran past was, "I didn't shoot anybody." I don't know if he was saying it directly to me or just you hear it on the footage.
Right, and at trial, it sounded like he was disputing that he had said that or that he meant to say that.
Right.
I thought that was kind of interesting. That like his initial reaction was to say I didn't shoot anybody, which my interpretation at the time, watching footage of this in August 2020, right? My videographer had the sound of that. You could hear Kyle saying, "I didn't shoot anybody. I didn't shoot anybody." Is that he was just trying to get the crowd off his back,
right?
Like make it seem like it was somebody else, but that wasn't the explanation that he offered in court.
Right. Which is interesting because that's what I took was the same thing. That he had a mob chasing him, and I'm like, well, if they catch you, like you got a big gun, more people are gonna. If you did in fact shoot somebody, more people are gonna get shot. And like I explained in a situation in Portland, there was a guy who was getting attacked in a protest who had stabbed somebody, but he was part of the protest, and it was kind of like a hard right troll. I think that was kind of, I don't want to call him that because I don't know the guy personally, but it was someone that was counter protesting the protest, right? People can call people what they want. But he came in and accosted him and he got stabbed in the process. But the whole mob mentality kicked in, and they said he stabbed somebody and they attacked him. But more people got cut and more people got stabbed because he was defending himself from this crowd of his peers, really, with the knife that he held, much like Tyree Nelson still held that gun. And whether or not he did kill somebody, did shoot somebody or not, there was baseball bats, table legs, rocks. We saw all sorts of weapons coming in his direction. And your
fireplace pokers, you know.
Right, and it's scary because in AR-15, a gun is a gun is a gun is a gun, right? Like there was an argument that came up. A bullet's going to hurt people no matter what. You know what I mean? A 22 is just as deadly as any other bullet.
Right. People are always like, don't get a 22. Well, if you don't think a 22 is going to get hurt, let somebody shoot you with one. You know?
Yeah, right. Like I got shot.
I've heard it's worse.
Yeah.
It's harder to remove a 22 because they break up and somebody. I mean, it's a graphic conversation, but like when I took the Virginia concealed carry course, the instructor basically told me 22s are actually the most hated by doctors. That it's not as likely to stay intact in somebody's body, so it's actually drastically harder to remove.
And they're long range and they bounce around a lot, so it could hit a bone and then move direction and trajectory, and so it can do a lot of internal
hard
damage.
to pick it out.
Right, which is again we're not gun experts here, right? But from what we've heard, what we know, that's the thing. A gun is dangerous, and so in that crowd when they were attacking, so the angle that I saw to answer the question, and I would definitely want to get more, but was I saw a kid that was getting attacked by a crowd, and I'm like, dang, he's got a gun, not a good idea. And then what happened. And so it'd be hard pressed for me not to be like he was defending himself in those moments. What led up to them, and that's just me thinking from a place of self-preservation. Like what would I do in that moment if I thought I was about to die? And I don't know where Kyle's head was because I'm not Kyle. You know what I mean? So it'd be hard place for me to say what he was experiencing in the moment that got him to pull the trigger. Was there another gun there? Yes. Did he feel that a skateboard was a deadly weapon in his moment? Did he even think about that? I don't know, but it definitely it was interesting seeing other footage though, and seeing it from different angles, and then hearing the testimony of the individuals in the moment there that were personally attached to it, like you were, even through your footage, they asked you to talk through it, and your story is 100% personal to you because of the way you experienced it, right?
Right. Well, I mean, like, first of all, nobody made good decisions that day. You know, not law enforcement, not protesters, not the armed citizens, and you know, I think a lot of this trial is going to be in part based on how the jury interprets what people who took the witness stand said versus evidence, because there's a lot of, like, there's witness accounts allegedly that Rosenbaum was flipping out porta potties, starting fires, pulling trailers into the road, starting garbage bins on fire, and he's always a Zelensky and jump kick man, which I don't know how they can't find jump kick man. You think
How is that?
That is interesting.
They've identified
interesting.
people through crazy footage from DC and from
the provocateur who was hanging out with Zelensky and Rosenbaum the whole night, although Zelensky refutes that he even knows Rosenbaum. It's interesting that those three are seen together and they're so integral to this. And, you know, obviously there's proof now that at least Rosenbaum was at the location, that they claimed he threatened both Rittenhouse and Walsh. That Grambo, as we call her now, Grambo, the best meme ever from the whole thing. Claims. So the question is whether or not they consider those genuine testimonies. Do they consider Gage Grosskreutz a quality witness to the events? Obviously, you know, the re-racking, is that something that they take into consideration, that he tried to shoot him when he had his hands up, allegedly, is the claims by Gage Grosskreutz. It matters, all those different things come into play, I think, very seriously when the jury is going to make their decision, because I don't think it took a lot to provoke Rosenbaum. In fact, I think from the video you can see, and people claim they heard him saying he wanted to go back to jail. When you're homeless, you're looking for a way to get into jail sometimes.
3 hots in a cot.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that, but that's, again, this is all witness testimony. These statements, most of them, minus the shoot me N-word and some of those things, and the photographs of him flipping stuff, like, that's all their experience, what they claim they heard. So the question is how much is the jury going to base this off of the entire story or part of the story, or just the evidence? What do you guys think?
I mean, on the Rosenbaum thing, I thought something that was really interesting was the fact that the other armed citizen who took the stand, I believe, and I've got to make sure that I have my
I think Ryan Walsh
said that his impression of Rosenbaum was that he was sort of like a clown, basically, for lack of a better word. That wasn't the word that he used, but basically that he saw him as, making threatening statements, but not a quote unquote like true threat. And of course Kyle interacted with him in a very different way, that led to a very different outcome. But that within that situation there were two different ways that he was sort of viewed. I mean, it goes to the issue of perspective, but it also highlights why more recording would have actually been more valuable on that night, because the things that Kyle Rittenhouse says that were said to him are also in dispute, right? The prosecutors say, how come there's no video of those threatening statements? And then they also can't produce higher quality video of something they say is a crucial moment, which is apparently Kyle raising the rifle. So both sides have claims that they essentially can't support with video audio evidence, and so it comes down to the jury to see if they feel like the standard of proof has been met one way or another.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to paint that with words for it. I wish I could.
One guy Wax is real eloquent.
Yeah.
Well, he's as fancy as his camera.
Yeah, we're all sitting here with phones. He's got this giant rig over here.
And
We all have rig envy here. It's happening.
It's like,
It's happening.
it was some point near the end of the trial, I don't remember exactly which day, but that effectively was a point brought up that it was very telling that like there's so many moments where it's like struggling to find the video, and then it's like this other moment where like, oh, that was the only thing that wasn't recorded on video. Like you have this recorded, this recorded, this recorded, and it's just like, holy cow, like there really was so much of this recorded, and even that still left room for certain things to be basically like, he said this and he said that, and in which person is the jury going to find more credible on those? I think that you'll probably see more recording at these types of events or these types of moments, partially from what happened with all of this. But it is, it's so hard to say in terms of like how that's going to pan out, because it just depends on like what did those people feel in the room at the time when they were watching that person. I know you actually sat in on a lot of it, but I know like for myself a lot of it was watching through a live stream, and so obviously the live stream does not show the jury, does not show any of their reactions or anything like that, and it's to protect their own anonymity and whatnot, for the integrity of the case. So it's really hard to say, because like even on a case that is scrutinized by millions of people, not just in the U.S. but internationally, I'm finding out, that are watching in on this case. When it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what the level of scrutiny is on the media. It's just the people in that room that are going to make the decision. Whether you have absolutely nobody outside the courtroom paying attention or the entire world paying attention, it's really just going to come down to how they reacted to that witness testimony and what they felt was credible. It's definitely been an interesting one on that, because I think that the cast of characters that have been brought in on all of this has been very extensive. You've seen people in so many different roles called to the stand in this. Anybody from the armed citizens to the demonstrators, protesters, rioters, different definitions depending on what part of the night you're focusing on, I suppose. And it's and then like the car owners and all these different and so it's just like it's such an intricate story in that sense, that like there's so many different people that each have their own reasons to believe them, reasons to be hesitant about their testimony, and how do you weigh all of that against each other, since so many of them are effectively either completely conflicting accounts or accounts that just really push towards one conclusion or really push towards another.
Let me ask you, do you guys feel that, and we're not going to get into great detail of the cases, but excuse me, do you feel in this case that your footage gave the best representation, what they chose to use, gave the best representation for either prosecution or defense? And do you feel that in other situations you've been in, that your footage would, things that were caught on your cameras would possibly sway another case in other places? And by that I mean, so I was watching through some footage in Portland, and I fully forgot about it. And it was just a little clip where you're outside the police bureau there, and the police came out. They rushed the shield line, and right in the middle on the side, and the shield wall's pushing back, right? And there's tear gas, and I don't even, a little bit of tear gas maybe at this point, but and they're marching in, and some explosives, and then I didn't even realize it. I got hit with shrapnel at one point. I wasn't sure what it was from. I happened to watch this clip, and someone had dropped a brown paper bag, and then the guy turned around and bolted out of the crowd. And then that brown paper bag exploded, and it shot shrapnel everywhere. And I wasn't sure if in that moment, like, oh, that's the guy that's what blew up and hit me, because you're, oh shit, I got hit. And I was like, were they meaning to do that to the people that are in the protest? Like, were they trying to do that to attack them, or was it an early detonation, early fuse type thing? They were hoping that the police would march over it, and then it would explode when they got there. And then later in the night, we were in the park, and we were all kind of moving through all the streamers and us, and someone threw it was like a toilet paper roll type thing. It would have like a pound of black powder in there, and it was like a makeshift pipe bomb that had been thrown, and it didn't detonate. And so it was, these things came up later, and I hadn't thought about it, but I was like, man, I caught that clearly on film. The person, you can see them like dropping the bag and then cutting out of the crowd. And so in this, I figured like they picked, they kind of cherry picked what footage they wanted to use, right? From who they wanted to use it. And they sourced it from obviously multiple different locations. But do you feel that there's footage of yours that in this case that would have been better used, or do you feel like what was used was to the best of the benefit of the case?
With mine, I'm pretty sure it was played through all the way. So I would actually say no, I don't think so. Only in that there wasn't anything more per se to add in. I mean, obviously it was analyzed in different ways by the different, depending on who was on the stand, defense, prosecution, or somebody for one of those two. But the clip itself, I'm pretty sure at a few different points was actually played through in real time.
Right.
So, So no, and I also I didn't see the first shooting, so it wasn't like, oh, they didn't use this other thing and only wanted to focus on this because this was better quality.
Yeah.
It really, for mine in particular, I don't think came down to that. It just came down to more the analysis part of that,
Sure.
and how people dug into it, slowing it down, zooming, that sort of thing.
I think that something that was really interesting for me about the footage shot by Chris June for me used in trial was that it, I think with only one exception, each of the times that I saw it be presented were in the context of it actually synchronized with other angles. And I actually quite appreciated that presentation because from the distance that it was filmed at, which was really just across the street, but it's still, it's pretty wide. It was a DSLR camera. Shooting with a wide angle from across the street. So Kyle Rittenhouse looks pretty small on the screen.
Sure.
And, when I first received that footage, I remember being a little bit confused actually about what I was looking at. And it is much more graphic a little bit later because then my videographer sort of moves in and he sees the corpse being loaded into it's a graphic way of describing it, but being loaded into the trunk of a van, and then he talks to some of the other armed individuals who are kind of trying to make sense of what just happened. He films as other journalists are showing it to them, and so like the way that I saw the video on my own platform was, here's video of gunshots, yelling, and it's a little bit confusing. You certainly couldn't, I think, form an opinion on the shooting from that footage alone. On its own, you absolutely could not inform yourself beginning to end what happened.
Right.
And what you would see is that people were confused afterward. Like the people on the ground seemed to feel that way as well. It was documentation of the fact that people didn't understand what happened.
Yeah.
But when synchronized with other angles at trial by both teams presented it that way, not only did the situation itself make more sense, but what you're actually seeing in my videographer's feed makes more sense in the context of synchronization with other angles.
Yeah. Go ahead, no, your things. I know we got people that, like I said, and I'm gonna, if you guys see me looking up here, and these are, I'm loving this, but I'm gonna try to gather as many questions from the viewers as well. So we're on a little bit of a delay.
Right on.
What we're seeing. So I can turn off the TV so it's not distracting us. And I think maybe that's the problem.
Okay, yeah, well.
I can read that. You guys can read it up there, we're good?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fine.
yeah.
You'll
I'm
get
gonna
it.
look at my comments as well.
Yeah, feel free. You guys keep it. I mean, don't feel like you're not.
You gotta do this.
Yeah, you gotta check your. No, check your comments, man. Like, I want this to be. I mean, legit. It's interactive.
Check the old Twitter first.
Yeah,
See how the bird site's feeling.
Bird site.
Well, the court had all the entire video for me that night because I live streamed. And since I don't have the blue cool check mark like some of us in here.
I think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
No, I'm just
kidding.
Big all
But, I couldn't download my video or view it in HD, so
Right.
law enforcement had an HD copy, but there was about 2 hours of footage, and I was kind of interested that they didn't choose to use law enforcement handing out water bottles. That was a viral video I took because of Ryan Balch made the claim of law enforcement collusion.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's going to be any investigation into that, or whether or not it's all hearsay, because I didn't ever see a squad car pull up with a female law enforcement saying, "Oh, we're going to send them down your way," but he did claim that.
Yeah.
You would think that there'd be drone surveillance of that too,
Right.
from 9,000 feet up.
Right.
Amongst other things.
Do we know? Does the Kenosha Police Department they wear body cam? Are they cammed up? Do we know? I don't. No.
I don't believe it.
I know that they had people from all over
Right.
with them, from all different
Just
Wawatos.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think my impression is the answer to that is no.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
And the fact that none of that was introduced, like even from like squad cars and stuff, I was surprised that there wasn't. Oh yeah, not even with Mike. That like there were all these different Bearcats and squad cars and all these different law enforcement vehicles, but I didn't see any footage that came from them specifically
Right.
used, other than the aircraft.
Sure.
So my inclination too, I feel like is no, although I don't know for sure, but that is something that it's also complicated because there were so many different departments there. It was not just the Kenosha Police; it was like county sheriffs. It was the pretty sure there were even some other towns that had sent in,
Yeah, like state police.
Wasn't
all
that
that
the
stuff.
national
Waukesha.
Waukesha,
Well,
yeah.
I remember the night before on, was that Monday? When they had about 4,000 people show up, like right as things were dissipating.
Yeah.
And that's when the city kind of started to burn that night.
Mhm.
You know, I think after that they realized they needed help, you know.
Yeah.
And keep in mind,
Yeah.
oh yeah, there's another mic.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, there it is.
Ford's
Yeah,
a mic hog situation.
He has to have the mic and the laptop. Yeah. You know, I think it's, the whole situation was crazy on Monday night. I didn't know if there's any way there was like 40 police officers were gonna be able to fend off 4,000 people. And I thought there was a good chance that the courthouse would be like the third precinct that I saw Minneapolis go up. But the protesters were deterred, and then they went down Sheridan, and that's when they started lighting up, you know, Carnosaurs and all these buildings on fire. And the viral video that inspired other people to come out and protect businesses at the gas station, because there was armed citizens at the gas station that night, and that video went incredibly viral, which was used as a basis, I think, to inspire other people to come out.
Was it just a video of people like standing at a gas station? Or
Yeah,
some
they were
kind of
armed at the gas
confrontation?
station, and there was confrontation, but they
Okay.
prevented them from burning it down. But of course, they looked at them as counter-protesters again, but they were only there trying to protect their property. So.
Do you remember a lot of the armed citizens that were out there? Do you remember, like, because I distinctly remember some of the ones that I watched in the video that I talked to that were having conversations. They were there with people from the neighborhood that like on their, and I've said this, on their flag jackets, like one of them had a pretty, like, I mean, it was cool, it was really unique looking BLM patch that he had. Another one had Justice for Jacob written on his helmet. And it was like, and they were saying like, oh, we're here to protect you in Kenosha. We want to keep everyone safe. And I think, like you said, there was this massive influx of like law enforcement and, you know, this militarized presence with like Bearcats, MRAPs, and there was this tear gas. And they were like, no, like we as citizens, like we're protecting our city from more destruction, and we want to protect our people. And so they had people that were almost like the negotiate, like the middlemen between a lot of the protests and then like these armed citizens, and then people that were backing them, and they were like, I remember there was these two young black gentlemen that were on bicycles, and they were kind of rolling around with the armed citizens, militia, whatever, what have you. And they're like, nah, and they kept telling people, like, nah, take it easy, man, and these guys are here for us, they're here for us, these are our people, these are our people. And I was like, wow, it's not the narrative that you're seeing in any of the media that you're out there. It's like, oh, these armed gunmen came in to like hunt down people of color, or there's all these crazy like spins that I've seen, and that's where I think it's unique that the people that were there and these experiences that we've all been in, like what you do here is different because it does cater to like your full comprehension of the experience, right? So when I saw it, it was a very different experience. Which looking back now, because I hadn't seen a lot of the footage up until this last couple of weeks, and then like as I've seen it through mainstream media, I'm like, well, that's not what happened. That's not at all what happened. And I kind of realized I deviated from my roots. That's kind of why we do what I do is that I saw what's happening in Seattle from mainstream media. Well, that's not what's happening. And so it's interesting that the question that came up was that do I feel that other footage has changed the way that I've seen the case? And I think like hearing other things almost like bolstered up and reinforced what I saw because it came from a very raw source we're talking about. It wasn't cut, clipped, edited, and kind of put together with like a soundbite narrative from somebody in the studio saying, "This is what happened. Let me show you why. This is what happened. So you can tune in and listen to that. You know, someone saying what they said." But I mean, what I heard and what I saw was very different. You know? And I think that's where it was really sad in that because you saw, like I said, that mob mentality and a lot of things where people weren't even. There was a real optics battle.
They just wanted drama. Some people were just all about the drama. Adrenaline junkies.
We were kind of referring to that, folks, and I think all of us kind of have a little bit of that in us, you know, like the fact people ask like, well, why do you, and then someone asked about that as well, but was that, like, do you feel more comfortable now being out in the field and being around like a live active protest, or are you?
After August of 2020?
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to kind of bring this up in a question form, but I guess I'll kind of answer it. So I mean, to place it in context, like I was in Kentucky also at an armed protest that day. So on that same day, I was filming the United Pharaohs Guard, which is sort of a Black Lives Matter aligned militia group in Louisville, facing off against heavily armed police officers. And in sort of the backdrop of that kind of militarized standoff, there were a number of unarmed protesters arrested on a bridge, kind of trying to make their way to the grounds that the Kentucky Derby was going to be taking place at. All of that was with the backdrop that there was an accidental discharge, or a negligent discharge, I should say, in that same city at a demonstration that injured 3 people a few weeks before, and 2 weeks later. So this is right that the situation I just described is hours before the Rittenhouse shooting. In fact, there were some people who actually offered to me that night, it seems like stuff's going down in Kenosha, like we're thinking of driving there, and I'm like, I have a contributor there. I think I just want to stick with Kentucky. This is kind of the community that I've, learned better. But with that backdrop of that shooting, it was only a couple weeks later that the NFAC, a Black nationalist militia, returned, and in anticipation of that, a huge right-wing armed presence came into the city and ended up confronting people who they thought were the NFAC and weren't.
Right.
And so you had armed local Black Lives Matter kind of aligned activists, again with rifles and handguns, right? Very, very different protest culture in Kentucky, right? Like
So many guns
everybody has guns, right?
So
Like,
many guns. Dude,
like,
I'm
gun
talking,
culture.
and they were big guns too. I remember seeing these
Oh, yeah.
people, they look like video game guns that day. That were.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
I didn't
there
know
was
that
one
was
guy
fun.
in the UPG who actually had like a revolver rocket launcher thing. Like I don't even think he could have actually fired it if he wanted to. Like I don't think he could have legally had like the rockets. But like
I'll
he's
take it
actually
out.
walking around with
If
a
I'm going down, you're all going down
Everyone's
with
going
me.
with me, man.
yeah, just a straight up like say hello to my little friend
Right.
kind of weapon.
That
But
was terrible. Kentucky, yeah, keep going.
The-
That was scary.
But
as
the
well.
thing that happened I remember very specifically, this was September 5th of 2020, again, only 2 weeks after the Rittenhouse shooting, was that as these groups came together very, close at each other, words start getting exchanged, but people started unholstering handguns. And to people who aren't familiar with sort of armed situations, long guns basically people are always kind of handling, right? You can have it strapped, but like you're probably using your hands to keep it like steady, making sure that your finger is like straight near the trigger but not on it, all that stuff. But if you're carrying a handgun, the handgun is staying wherever it's holstered. And if you unholster it, like that is considered to be like a really, like that's a big moment to do that.
Right.
And people were just doing that left and right. Like,
Right.
people, like this was a weird dynamic situation where amidst a crowd, people are basically pointing handguns at each other. And
Which was happening in Kenosha as well.
Right.
Zemeckis had that gun in the gas station that he was like referencing with it, just kind of pointing around.
Yeah, over there and over there.
right, so
Welcome to Wisconsin.
You guys are stupid gangster.
So- it took I think that there was this feeling over 2020 where a lot more rallies are taking place, the Boogaloo movement is becoming more popular, and the guns are kind of like this prop, like a lot of guys saying, I have a Second Amendment right to carry this around, and I would never hurt anyone with it unless I had to defend myself. And that conversation, I interviewed people and had that conversation with them so many times. Sometimes it was even seen as a joking thing, right? I once interviewed a guy who was wearing a mask at the state capitol in Richmond, and he had a rifle with a bayonet at the end of it. And I was like, how would you end up using a bayonet in an urban protest setting? And he goes, I put a stabby part on the shooty part. Like that was his answer to me.
Best answer ever.
There was
Wow.
so there was some level
beauty
of
of the
like
simplicity.
irony. It was almost like a prop for some of them, and I'm not saying this to undermine the seriousness of people exercising the Second Amendment at these events, but I don't think that people necessarily reflected on how serious it is to carry a lethal weapon at these events, and following the Rittenhouse shooting, the notion that these things could legitimately turn lethal, I think, became just a lot more real. And that backdrop, I remember really informing the level of nervousness that I had on that day in Kentucky. And then, since then, I mean, at the Capitol, I filmed precisely one person with a handgun amidst a lot of other weapons. But I mean, it does show kind of the direction that things were going really until January 6th, I think felt like a climax. And then a lot of that kind of organizing just really dropped off the map. There hasn't been nearly as much, but the way that tensions escalated up to January 6th, I don't think you can draw a straight line from, Kenosha to get there. I don't think it's not a precise timeline. It's not precisely exact. But the country was really going somewhere dark and tense, and in a way, the Rittenhouse shooting was, I think, the biggest example of the way that ended up looking.
Yeah. Yes, what you said there. Yeah, please.
Was there a specific question? I'm so sorry. I was just so enthralled. I was so
but you're gonna
enthralled
answer it right now.
by his talking about that. Just in terms of like the tone of the country and sort of like the armed protests, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, in Michigan they had been doing that even like months prior. I mean, obviously like there's been even in years prior different armed demonstrations, but in Michigan it was becoming fairly common, I would say. Like April, that very first, they called it Operation Gridlock. That was the mid-April anti-lockdown protests, and there were people that were armed there outside the Capitol. A couple weeks later, they were armed and went inside of the Michigan State Capitol as the legislative session was meeting, which at the time was legal under Michigan law. They changed the law actually after January 6th to no longer allow open carry, but at the time it was. So I think that kind of all fits into that trend. Kenosha just happened to be such an incredibly pivotal flashpoint in all of that. But you definitely saw it in different states, in different parts of the country, people arming themselves at these demonstrations, getting groups together to arm themselves at demonstrations. This is happening on the left and the right. And as Ford had described there, I think that it was this continuous, not necessarily an escalation every time, but you definitely were seeing it happen more and more frequently. And then in the fall, I think there were just fewer demonstrations, so it didn't happen quite as often. And then certainly after January 6th, just in general, decline in that. Even recently, I went to the Michigan State Capitol. They have an annual Second Amendment march that's been going on for 12 years, so that far predates even like the Donald Trump era. And there were only roughly 100 people, something like that, out there, when there had been several hundred, just the same exact event a year prior, the Second Amendment March in 2020. And part of that may have to do with the fact that it's an off non-election year in terms of like big elections, governor and president. But also, I think that it can't be discounted the thought that maybe more people are having pause before going armed to certain demonstrations. Even here in Kenosha, there was only one security guard that it had out. It wasn't like a lethal ammunition, it was a pepper ball gun, and this is a security guard for one of the news vehicles here, and he actually put it away pretty quickly within a few minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
Which network was it that brought the tactical guy? I was like pretty surprised when I saw that aesthetic, and I'm like, God damn it, if it's CNN.
Should be the most anti-gun network that has a person with a gun.
CNN brings the
But it's a non-lethal, guys. It's not the same argument.
less lethal.
Yeah, less lethal. That's right. That's
It'll
right.
kill you, but less.
But yeah, just slowly.
God.
But and context matters, because it's not like every single news van has that out. It was just one that had somebody quite so openly displayed with like handcuffs and pepper spray and several other things, flashlight and whatnot on his person. And so it's definitely, now contrasting that compared to, I would see more, although not quite so, I feel like seeing it that openly displayed, like initially the dude had like a helmet on and it looking like what would typically be described as a demonstrator at the vast majority of these events, and this is their security guard. But the fact that there weren't a whole bunch of different news outlets all doing that, there weren't a whole bunch of people out in the crowd doing that today or in the last couple days, maybe speaks a little bit to people's hesitation to that sort of thing in the aftermath of this incident, and just in general everything that was seen in 2020.
Is this verdict, you guys think, going to change that? Change the way that the open carry, not maybe the laws, but the way people look at open carry, the way people are. Go ahead, Ben.
All right. Well, I think that there's a lot of Americans look at this as like maybe an opportunity for them to go after the Second Amendment. I think that the AR-15 has been the trigger term here. Maybe if Rittenhouse had a handgun, they might look at it a little differently. He might have not gotten the charges, who knows?
Well, if he had a handgun, that would have been illegal. It is.
Would have been illegal, yeah.
So actually, it would have, as
That
much
is
as
true.
the AR-15 has become this like media focal point, like if he actually had a handgun, he
That would
would
have been illegal.
he would have
because it's a
probably
long
caught
barrel.
like a misdemeanor or like an equivalent to the charge that was dropped about carrying a weapon that he wasn't allowed to, because he legitimately couldn't have a handgun.
No, absolutely. Thanks for reminding me.
Yes.
There's a big gun culture in Wisconsin. What was the question again? I lost that. Real quick.
The verdict in this case, do you think it's going to affect
Well,
gun laws in any way, or if not the laws themselves, but the way people feel about, like you were talking about with your Second Amendment rally, open carrying, like when they see that, there's a sign of people do interpret it. It's been very vocal as a sign of aggression to have it. Well, it's your right, but is it going to change the way people perceive open carry?
I think a lot of Americans may perceive this as whether or not they'll have a right to protect themselves if there's a mob chasing you. I'm just saying that's probably how half the country looks at it, because we live in a very tribal country. And if you don't have a state that doesn't have gun culture, that like literally we are one generation from my father taking his gun to school for show and tell. That my father literally did that as a kid. Like now
He
imagine
probably got kicked out of school after that, but
no, there's like
Admits
that was
it.
that's the common thing,
Right.
But here we are, literally a whole generation later. If you grew up in a state that doesn't have has very strict gun rights rules, you might look at it and you're like, oh yeah, we need to get rid of this. And there's a whole aspect of the world that feels justified in trying to come for our constitutional rights on the Second Amendment. And there's a whole establishment that wants to get rid of the guns, although it's the establishment and governments who is the number one drug dealer in the United States is the biggest gun dealer in the world.
Right there.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother
Exactly. It's a whole other bag of impact.
I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Just can those worms right back.
Just
That's what the rundownlive.com is. Tune in, guys, if you want to hear more about that. But it's interesting because I do see that with globalism, there's this overall understanding that Americans are inherently violent because they own guns, and that's what makes us inherently violent. Although if you look at the statistics, more people die from rocks and stones than guns, and I think that we really drill that fear into our youth. We do all the like drills in school, mass shooter drills in school. But if you look up the statistics, you're 7 times more likely to die of like a bee sting or getting struck by lightning than dying from an active mass shooter. So why aren't they like arming teachers with bug repellent? It's because I think
I'm equally as terrified of bees, just so you know.
But I'm just saying, like, that's the thought process, and then they're developing this police state. And somebody asked in the chat, where do we see the future going? And I think that all is based on how government reacts. The more armed government becomes, the more armed the protesters become to, compensate for the way the government is, becoming heavily armed. It's not okay for us to have military on the street because of policy comitatus, but we can make our law enforcement dressed like military, train with military, and essentially be that because, they're law enforcement. Through the 1033 program, we give them Stingray. They can download our cell phone conversations right to the car. That's one thing I'd like to file a FOIA on, is to see if Stingray or Hailstorm technology was used, because we all have crappy internet. So I had to be going to a cell phone site simulator where they download it all and they can watch in real time, listen in real time, all that kind of stuff. I think that the world is polarized. They're polarized between, the Second Amendment right, or if Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty, and I think that's the way they look at it. I think one half of the United States says, oh, well, he's guilty, we don't really care about, the Second Amendment that much. They feel like he did something wrong because of what the media portrayed. Maybe they haven't had all the evidence. And then you got this right side, they don't care as much, or they don't care the same way as the left does, where they just are worried about their Second Amendment rights, but they're not looking at the evidence maybe to see if you really did something wrong. So I think that there's this ignorance that goes back left and forth, and they solely rely on mainstream media, which, as you know, if you get your news from the mainstream media, you're not really getting the news. They call TV programs because they're there to program you. That just let you think about that for a minute. So.
Well, they got a mic down there. Tune in, Ford.
I don't know where to take it from that.
Did I just ramble a whole lot?
No, it hits. It hits. 'Cause I
Touched on
think-
a lot of different things.
Made
I
some
think-
points.
Yeah, I think really
Things were said.
there were words. Comments were made. Yeah. Gestures appreciated.
Well, hopefully I didn't offend everyone, just some
Alright.
people.
On the future of the
Most.
2A, I think that was kind of the point. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that was the initial.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a piece of rhetoric that I've heard a lot when I've interviewed members of militias and other armed activist groups, which is to the effect of I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Mhm.
And the implication of that, if to people who don't understand it, is that, you know, these folks are basically saying I carry a gun because I'd rather, kill somebody and then have to defend myself in court than not be prepared to defend myself, on the street.
To need it, not have it, then not have it and need it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse was prosecuted, and I think the fact that, for example, the January 6th defendants are being prosecuted has deterred the types of activities that people who would do the same, who would show up, I'm not saying that necessarily would end up shooting people, but that have the same motivations of the January 6th protesters and who had the motivations of Kyle going into the situation. I think that there has been a deterrent factor. Like, we have seen that fewer people have gone out armed this year than did last year, and I think that largely is because of law enforcement response. I mean, I think at least BG and I were both, I don't know about you guys, at the Richmond rally at the beginning of 2020.
2021.
I'm sorry, yeah, the very beginning of 2021.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, sorry,
Or
I
are
do
you
mean
talking
2020.
about the big one
So,
in 2020?
Right,
Oh,
so
yeah,
I will compare and contrast 2020 and
Gotcha,
2021 to
there we
make this exact point.
Because it was a huge gap.
So in 2020, on January 20th of 2020, there were, the estimates range, a little bit, but like the number I've mostly been using is like above 20,000 people showed up almost universally armed for a Second Amendment rally in Richmond. And in anticipation of that event, like, the state capitol changed its rules so that you couldn't bring in guns into the capitol, essentially preventing something like what happened in Michigan in, I guess, April. But there were a lot of people around the building with guns, and in the end, nobody got hurt. Right, they were able to basically have their rally, and everybody got together, and they were chanting, "We will not comply," and this was an event that was actually annual, but it had never been even close to that big. The enthusiasm was because of the fact that it seemed like the winds were actually moving toward state preemption going away so that localities could impose more gun control than Virginia normally allows. In any event, they were saying, we will not comply. Like, we'll be back here next year, it'll be the same, we will, like, no matter what rules happen, we won't follow them. But a lot happened in a year after that, January 6th, a few days before what ended up being the follow-up to that rally. And then all the things in the middle, Kyle Rittenhouse. And in the end, it was like 30, 40, a little bit more than 30, like, it was 30 or 40 people who were part of the original VCDL that organized that event. And then there was kind of a hodgepodge of other groups that showed up, like Black Panthers, Boogaloos, there was a few Proud Boys, but it was not nearly the same crowd that actually was willing to so-called not comply. And I think that was largely because they were seeing the way that laws changed, but also the fact that law enforcement was occurring. Like, the law was being enforced, broadly speaking, and it didn't get enforced that day on the street, where some of them were openly showing off, look, my mag is too big under the regulations of Richmond and that sort of thing. But the number of people willing to physically go out there and continue to be armed drastically decreased. And we've seen that throughout the rest of this year, where those sorts of events are so much fewer and farther between.
Mm-hmm.
I think because they see the reality of, even if, and this is circling back to the point, even if Kyle Rittenhouse is acquitted, I think that it probably spooked the far right in the sense of, or the armed far right in the sense of believing that, they don't quite have the immunity that they might have expected. I also think that the other drastic change in context is that whereas under the Trump administration, many of them might have felt like they were an extension of the Trump agenda, therefore the government, fundamentally, broadly speaking, the government is on their side.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not true now. right, that if something like that happened again, I don't think that they would expect the president to be sympathetic to them.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Trump said you're all very special. To the people who stormed the Capitol, even if he was asking for them to leave peacefully, Joe Biden would certainly not tell Kyle Rittenhouse, you're very special.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
What happened in
Things have changed.
Michigan? What happened in Michigan that you mentioned in April?
Back in April, yeah.
so that was, well, you could explain that better than I could. I wasn't there.
I was gonna say, did you have like any videographers there for this?
Unfortunately not, no. That was during a weird period of COVID where I basically worked for a different company, and so for like 2 months I didn't leave my house and I was just working on my computer.
Gosh.
And then I was like, I have to get back out there, I'm gonna go crazy.
Yeah, well, the context of it was that there was the first anti-lockdown protest, and this actually was effectively one of the first in the entire world, because it was very early on in the pandemic to where there wasn't like reaction to the measures out in the streets quite yet. Obviously there have been many anti-lockdown protests all over the world since, but this was very early on in that, so there was a lot of attention, a lot of focus on that when it did happen. So that's in Lansing, Michigan. That happens on April 15th of 2020. And then the organizers of that event, basically in seeing that they got a lot of people out and that they generated a lot of media buzz around it, organized subsequent events. They, a week later, went to the governor's mansion, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, for those that are familiar, that's Michigan, just basically demonstrating outside of her house, or her mansion there. It's a, publicly,
Governor's mansion.
Yeah, governor's mansion. And then the following week, that April 30th, was when the session was to meet, the legislative session, to decide whether to allow for the extension of the emergency orders relating to the lockdowns. So the different provisions in place for when stores can be open, what can be sold, working hours, etc., all that stuff. And so they had intended to basically protest at this legislative session, calling on the legislators to not allow for an extension of the lockdown orders. And they, similar to the April 15th event, gathered outside the Capitol, but then also started going inside to basically try to get into the session. Which in and of itself isn't very uncommon. Like it's a public building. And actually, at the time, under Michigan state law, open carry inside the Michigan State Capitol was allowed. It's one of only a few state capitals that was allowing that still in 2020. So like they did just walk right in. I believe the only stipulation that the Michigan State Police made that were running the security there was just that you couldn't bring in signs. It's actually a very interesting contrast. You could bring in like AR-15 or any kind of open
Bring
carry
a gun,
weapon.
but no sign promoting guns.
Right, I mean,
The gun is engraved with a political message on it. If the gun said vote Republican or vote Democrat or something, like, does that constitute a sign?
I don't know.
Or what if this sign is in the shape of a gun?
See, and now we'll never know that.
Ooh, I think it might have to be functional. Like, that better be a
3D
worthy
printed,
firearm,
a
Mr.
3D printed
Yeah.
gun. You can make 3D printed guns.
I guarantee you, based on the fact that we just said this, that will happen. You're gonna start seeing gun-shaped signs.
What
It'll
year
definitely happen.
is the one that was planned to be kidnapped by the FBI, right?
Well, that's.
Oh, I thought you said who here plans to be.
No,
Oh,
that's a
no.
Whitmer.
He's asking about. He's asking about. It is a pretty high-profile case in Michigan. That is still ongoing. So, like the extent of the FBI.
Well, I think
involvement
there's like
is-
3 people that were allegedly affiliated or something.
There definitely were informants. That much is known. To the extent of how much that was actually like planned or executed, that's still way.
I look
It's
forward
one
to
of those
watching this
bizarre
Yeah,
cases
it's like
where
those
almost
files
everyone
have
is
to be
affiliated with the FBI.
Like, much
They
like-
try to kidnap the governor, and then it turns out that half of them are informants.
As far as I know, I think only 1 or 2 that were charged on that have taken some kind of deal so far. So the bulk of the trials that'll actually like go into detail on that have not happened.
There's also a weird situation where it's like split jurisdiction, that like half of them are being charged federally and half under like state law. So
Okay.
like they're gonna end up being, I'm assuming that any of them make it to trial, like it'll be in different jurisdictions. I feel like that's gonna be an extremely complicated case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complex because there's like different people involved and
Like
whatnot.
January 6th is gonna be complex.
Well, I mean, this has turned into one too,
All
where
this stuff.
you've got which I think is interesting. That you've got our ADA, who's personally prosecuting not just this case against Kyle Rittenhouse, but Dominic Black, Joshua Zeminski, and it blew me away that in a case that he's prosecuting personally, in charges that he personally drafted up, used that individual as a witness in a case against someone else who's prosecuting. And then when that was brought up, that blew me away. It was said, "You're doing this. Did we have a conversation about you getting any leniency?" He's like, "No, I'm just doing this because it's what's right. It's honest. It's a good thing to do." And then the defense asked him, like, he was like, "Well, yeah, it'd be great if I got a break. I mean, that'd be nice." Yeah. But the fact that there's all these peripheral cases, and then they mentioned it in the closing arguments, prosecution, they brought up, he mentioned, Zeminski, he mentioned, he's like, "Don't worry about them. We'll take care of it." Just nonchalantly, as if to say, like, those are key correspondence in this case, key facts that weighed into this case. And the fact that there's so many like subsequent cases that have come out of this, and as we talked about before, those that haven't, which are surprising, charges that didn't come out of this case, that a ton of my viewers have been asking, like, well, what about a gun charge here, and what about an assault charge there, and what about this, what about the other things, And they find it interesting that there's people that have testified, and like we were talking about January 6th, like facial recognition software, and all the way they're able to identify these people. You got Jump Kick Man, and you got Yellow Pants Man. The fact that in the case at this point, with this high profile case, they haven't been able to identify these people. And then you have people testifying that like Yellow Pants Man had 2 guns. I think Joanne, I'm not going to say her, Fedler, she was with the Rittenhouse crew. She was out there affiliated. She said that they didn't point their guns at him until he pointed his guns at them, and they emphasized guns. He said, "Yeah, he had 2 guns." This is their testimony in court. But no one's really talking about these other peripheral charges that are coming up. And I know in a lot of these cases there's a deep dive into things that are going to come up, like around and shrouding this main point event, which is of course right now Kyle Rittenhouse.
Should we open up questions to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we might want to head down to the courthouse soon. I'm hearing that there's stuff going on down.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
funny, I just checked in and they were like, it's the same.
Same
Well,
issue as same
It'll be
as
nice to
Yeah,
to get there soon.
Any of you guys jump into your feeds if you want to go ahead and
Yeah, if you guys want to drop,
This is interesting.
Yeah, go
if
ahead.
you guys want to drop any questions, we can see them on the TV. Just you might have to repeat them. If you have to try to direct them at one of us, if you'd like,
Sure.
or if you want, you know how to do the @ symbol. You guys have been in some of the most violent events of 2020. How has that affected you? I guess I'll go. I will say that like it's hard sleeping some nights.
Yeah.
It really is. Like it just the thoughts keep going through your brain, and it's not like you want to or you're concentrating. It's like almost like breaking up with a girlfriend, where you just constantly are stuck in analysis paralysis is what I would call it.
Analysis paralysis.
Analysis paralysis, where you
Say
can't
that
sleep at
12
night. You're
times
thinking
fast.
analysis paralysis. Analysis. Okay, I'm not gonna do that. I screw.
Please don't,
Anyways, but yeah. So there's many sleepless nights. I guess even like maybe a lot of you guys might concur these emotions, but watching these videos and going to court every day, it has a mental toll on you, where you are just you kind of in that like exhausted survival mode. It's almost like feeling just like we did a year ago, where we're like lack of sleep, media calling you all the time, everyone checking in to make sure that you're okay and that there isn't violence downtown. It's just overwhelming. But we put ourselves in these positions because we care about bringing you guys genuine information. And it's not really about us, it's about making sure that you guys know what's going on, because there is so much disinformation in there. And let's be honest, it's that disinformation that gets propagated by the media that creates the hate, because that's what's creating the tribalism, is the misinformation, because they want people to feel or act a certain way. And I think that we need to unprogram, deprogram ourselves. Tune into CJTV, the BG on the scene, and maybe Ford Fischer over here. Maybe Ford Fischer. But like News2Share, you're like awesome.
He covers a lot.
Yeah, dude, Ford Fischer's the man.
Thank you, I
have to say.
appreciate that. The only reason I'm a little distracted right now is so one of the comments that was actually left in response to your request for questions, someone is saying that apparently Dropkick Man was identified today by a news outlet who it has a description of the person and a criminal history, but also is not naming them because they are not charged with anything. And so I'm not exactly sure how reputable that is or how they got to that. So I'm not reporting that as fact, but this is something that apparently people are somewhat aware of.
Here it is. It says Dan O'Donnell.
Is the show that says
Yeah, Dan O'Donnell, 11:30 a.m. WISN, and according to the article, now keep in mind, WISN is a borderline conservative outlet. I'm just making sure, just want you guys to know where the news is coming from.
Right.
Dan O'Donnell show can now report exclusively that Jump Kick Man is a 40-year-old African-American male from Kenosha with an extensive criminal history, that's what they allege, was at the time of the Rittenhouse shootings on probation following a conviction for domestic violence battery. He faced a maximum sentence of 9 months in jail, but less than 2 months before he kicked Rittenhouse. He accepted a plea deal that netted him 12 months probation. The following year, he violated his terms of that probation and was sentenced to 7 months in jail. So I'm guessing he's probably in jail. So I'm not quite sure. So,
yeah, I don't know exactly what to make of that. I mean, I think
I don't know what to make of that
read
either.
more about it.
Yeah.
I think that it would
You
be.
grab that mic.
No, it could I mean, my initial instinct response to that is that if it could actually be proven who he is, if Kyle Rittenhouse is convicted, it could end up being a grounds to appeal, right? I didn't get to question, right? I have a right to face my accuser, right? In this case, one of his charges is based on one particular person,
Sure.
and that person didn't have a name, and now perhaps they do. But I mean, I think
very
it highlights.
solid point.
I think it highlights, the importance of documenting these things really
Right.
well. That I mean, I guess we don't know the process that the Dan O'Donnell show apparently went through to identify this person. We also don't know if they're correct. I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
quite literally, they could be wrong.
Yeah.
They could be like the Rundown Live.
Part of
Just kidding. Joking.
part of me is actually guessing that it doesn't inspire a great deal of certainty to me actually as I'm reading this article, and this really is a live reaction to this article, but
Sure.
it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in my mind that they give a lot of detail about the person who they say it is, and then they won't say the person's
The name is for whatever reason dropped from the
That reads to me like they're not 100% sure, like they felt confidently enough to publish this, but they their explanation, we're not identifying him because he's not charged with a crime. Gage Grospertz is Kreutz, or however you pronounce it, is also not charged with a crime, and everybody's using his name for obvious reasons, right? This person is a victim of, or he's being treated as a victim for the sake of the deliberations that are going on right now, in an extremely high-profile felony case. So it would be quite untraditional for the news media to not report that person's name, given that they're.
They'll come out eventually, I bet you.
It very well might. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being a subject of controversy, right?
Sure.
If it comes out, especially if the prosecutors really couldn't figure out who it is and some random radio show figured it out.
Right.
I think it could certainly complicate the appeals process. My assumption is that if he is acquitted on all charges, then it's almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
But we'll certainly find out. It could kind of illuminate it. I would point out, as all of us have covered January 6th extensively, that probably the single most critical participant in January 6th was the bomber the night before. The person who left these pipe bombs has still not been identified, right? They've been able to catch, identify so many people who went inside.
Right.
And it has left people with, to I think the point that Kristan was just joking about, it has left people so unconfident about that investigation that some people are like, are they even really trying to figure out who it is?
Right.
It certainly does not inspire confidence that they haven't been able to figure out who planted 2 bombs on either side of the United States Capitol the day before a transfer of power. Even if the rest of January 6th hadn't happened, that would have been a catastrophic situation, and it is still being treated as kind of a side note. Honestly, it's not talked about a lot,
Right.
even though it's by far the most severe individual thing that occurred that
That's
day.
interesting.
That's and I think you hit on the head. It's when you said what you said. It's the most interesting thing about that case And it's interesting the things that are reported as to what is deemed as pertinent to the case or the situation as to how it needs to be painted to the public, right? Like I think a lot of times you see that where some facts might be omitted and some, charges omitted because it fits a slight or a narrative much better if some facts are just not brought into light. Not that they don't exist, but they don't really fit into the dynamic of what we're trying to build at this point. And I think the January 6th is one that will forever be controversial in homes across the world and especially in our country where what people feel they saw and what people feel they experienced, what people feel the motivation was really behind all the events that took place in DC.
One of the commenters says, "Feed your cat."
We're gonna feed the cat Ford, actually.
No.
Oh my gosh.
No, my allergies can't stand it.
Right. Well, I don't want to keep us too long here, guys. I know that we both have.
Gotta feed the cat.
We gotta feed the cat. Gotta feed the
The
cat.
dog. Oh, just kidding.
No dog here.
No.
No dog here.
I love cats. I'm a big cat lover. I just, our dark
You're
humor.
amongst friends. I was there for it, but you're amongst friends. But really, I like the comments come in. I fully appreciate you guys obviously coming in today. It's a shame we couldn't get everybody that was out there, but I'm sure we'll run into them today at some point. We'll get a chance to chat.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what you do. In building a culture around an idea that we all have, which is we want to be the best representation of the reality of events that take place. And I think for all the viewers, I hope that everyone out there on all the different channels appreciate that. At points, it almost feels like an obligation to do it, but I feel like it is it's a role that we've chosen to play, and your participation is a big part of that. And I think that a lot of people need to know that the people behind our streams, the viewers, are integral to helping keep the stream alive. But also it feeds us, like in those weary nights and those smoky and tear gas laden streets. The kind of the motivation and the driving factor to be like, hey, we're serving a purpose. And this case is a prime example of what the full weight of that purpose can serve. And so I appreciate all you guys being, not just out there, but brave enough to be out there.
I got one last question, and it's for you, CJ.
Oh, yeah.
So you played an important role in the middle of this trial, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
We didn't even bring that up.
I don't know how important it was, but it did play in.
And so basically, CJ, what was going on and through your mind when you heard the car lot owners giving their testimony about how much damage was done to their car lot?
Right. Okay. And then we'll tap and wrap. But that for me was, so you guys saw the interview. We all watched it live on my feed. We were live while it happened as we're watching them interview the car source owners, and we know what they were doing, right? They were trying to build the fundamental belief that Kyle Rittenhouse and the people that were with him were never asked to be there, and so that's why they were on the stand, right? But I think the prosecution realized that didn't work out the way they had planned because it all fell apart with different stories that they came out, and then the credibility of the witness is what I think was in question by the defense. Like, well, how can you fully say that you didn't actually ask when you're not able to recount all these other facts? And so I had a one-on-one interview that I did with the car source owners, and while I was watching, I realized that's not what you said. Like, what you're telling in sworn oath right now, or sworn testimony, is not what you said. And you were pretty solid on what you said before, and I gave everyone like I said, maybe didn't recall it properly. But at that moment, they had plenty of time to do the evaluation of their lost inventory and the amount of money they were going to need. And so to be clear, I sent in, to be fair, the footage went into both prosecution and defense of that interview. The defense chose to use it, and then during the case, they actually went into you saw him pull that iPad up.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure you were in there when it happened. He pulled it up, and they was like, "Wait a minute, look at this." And the defense watched the video right there, and then changed some of the questions they asked based off the video they watched.
How did you get a hold of the defense?
Dude, I had so many people in the chat that were like, "This is the DA's office. This is the defense office. This is the defense."
That's what they well. Listen, one thing I love about all you guys, when you're out there commenting, useful information we can use while we're out there.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not gonna lie. That's one of the biggest things you can do for us. Whether it's links or, hey, something's going on down at the courthouse, get on down to the courthouse.
Right.
Right.
And so that played in. Then they showed that was on a Friday. I think the Monday. That was the first thing they did. They pulled the car source owner back on the stand, and they played the video. They're like, well, this is the video in question. And that's when, we they were like where you got called in, that's where it got really close for me to being put in a question. They didn't need anything I had to say though, because the videos, like all of our videos, pretty much speak for themselves. The narration is really just us telling you what's happening as it happens. As we're experiencing it, maybe we just give you an audio play of what you're seeing and hearing. Out in front of the camera, but yeah. Other than that, that video played in much like all of ours did, and all I can hope, and I'm sure all of you can echo that, is that it helps give the jury all the tools they need to do what they're there to do, which is deliver, something that I think I am personally, I can't speak for everybody, it's something that I'm proud to be part of, which is a country that provides this type of opportunity for us to go in front of a panel of our peers, and hopefully it's getting better and streamlined, because there's been plenty of issues. We've seen court cases that have been, obviously tons being overturned now because we have a technological advance and the research and science that we have available to us now. But I think it's great that we have a place that doesn't just throw you in a deep dark hole based off an assumption or a state evaluation of what you've done, and then you're gone from the world. And we're seeing that, and I'm sure we'll see plenty more of that in places like Cuba. And I know that my team, my sister, has spent an extensive amount of time, and some of it's very personal to her, in places where these same rights and opportunities are afforded to people. And so it's great. I feel great knowing that we played a part, though we didn't volunteer to play a part for any one team, but we played a part in something right now that I think is going to be a big part of the continuation of case law as it works forward, and obviously in people's lives who are dramatically affected in this. But that being said, again, I appreciate everyone, all the viewers on all the different channels for being here. For the questions, I apologize we weren't able to get to them like we normally would in the studio feed, but it's just a real honor to be able to sit down with these guys, because like I said, we run into each other all over the country in some pretty hairy situations.
And it's wonderful, like running into you, like guys, like I ran into Ford in front of Capitol Hill while everyone was getting fog bombed with tear gas and pepper spray, and I was like, oh, I'm just happy to see. I was like, oh, it's Ford Fischer, yeah. Like everybody knows I'm here, my guy. And then I ran into you on January 12th when they did the Gangs of New York style Antifa Proud Boy battles, running through the alleys and stuff.
In the streets,
and I was like, hell yeah, CJ Halliburton's here. It's like, what's up? You ready? Little bite. And then you've been everywhere we've been. I just haven't run into you, I don't think, because I've never met you.
Last I saw you was in LA for that We Spa situation that happened down there for that the transgender protests and rallies that they were having down there with the We Spa deal. I saw you in North Carolina in Elizabeth City, which as my viewers know is not Elizabeth Town. Contrary to my flight plans and subsequent.
I bet you were all in each other's footage somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it does feel good to know we're all out there, because I think that you end up like birds of a feather type thing, but I mean, as you see,
there's comfort knowing we have friends in those situations.
It is, because we are in some pretty dangerous situations. I think that's one of the things that we provide for a lot of our viewers, is a buffer between the harsh reality of what really can happen in the streets. Like we saw with people dying, people being stabbed, people being beaten up, a lot of events, pepper spray and tear gas, and what's happening like in the comfort of a home. And being able to connect into that, and a kind of a visceral connection with the reality of the news that's taking place without having somebody tell you what happened. You can not only see it, but I think the beauty part about what we do here is, and so many others like us, is we connect you with history that's being made. And in that, we can be at a protest, and someone could, in any of these opportunities we have to talk to people, someone could ask you a question through your feed, posed towards someone else, and you might ask that person a question, and that might, in fact, change the course of their actions, or the way they see things, or open them up to a new opportunity. They might lead a crowd or the events in a different direction. So I encourage everyone to be involved, ask questions, be civil, respectful, stay away from any hate speech of any kind, and stay curious, man. Stay super curious.
Yeah, I think the way that independent media has risen up to kind of come into the fray and be able to bring this truth to a wider audience is something really incredible. And you touched on it earlier, I wanted to make sure I said something about it, just like the importance of the people that are viewing in the audience, the questions and whatnot, and and I know I struggle with being able to reply to a lot of that just because it's just so much going on so often, but it really is like a critical connection there, because it's building something outside of the traditional media scopes and the way that it's been done for decades upon decades already, and seeing this new age way of having an insight into these types of events is something that's really been incredible.
Yeah.
So I also likewise wanted to say that I appreciate the work that you guys have put in and the way that you've been able to go out and offer perspectives. There's been times where I've been curious about a certain thing and had to check in and knew where to go and knew that there's ways I can get a much better insight than trying to just look up like, oh, article from one of these couple really well-known outlets.
Sure.
And it's just like, you know, I know that if it's coming, it's much more, you know, raw and authentic footage, and that's something that's really, really special. And so I wanted to say that I appreciate the people that support that and that continue to tune into that and engage with that type of content, because that is critical to keeping us going like into these moments, just like Kenosha in particular.
Sure.
I know that was one where, like, for me, it was about like momentum of like people encouraging me to get out there and being able to continue to bring this kind of coverage. Like, that was an important factor, and so thank you for being there as part of that journey.
Absolutely.
I guess last but not least, we got Ford Fischer here. But when we find somebody asked in the show, like, how do we know where things are so fast? It's because you guys are messaging us. It's you guys who sent us the links of where things are happening.
Sure.
10 out of 10 times.
And a lot of Twitter, just searching stuff on Twitter. I mean, I agree with kind
Did
of
you call it the
these,
bird
like,
page?
Bird, yeah, the bird site.
Bird site? Yeah.
Just call it hell site. Like,
Birds are robots.
I use Twitter because I
Drones.
have to, but I honestly,
Yeah.
like,
I'm
I
not
hate
Bill
Twitter. I really,
The one that's
Right.
verified on
Right.
there hates it.
I hate the bird site. But the just like final thought that I had was I agree with everybody else's wrap up thoughts. I would just add that, as should probably be obvious by this discussion, I think of independent journalism or independent journalists not to be in competition with each other, but basically to be serving the same goal. You know, like when I go to something and like BG's also there, like, you know, we're presenting footage in a relatively similar style. But there's no part of me that's like, oh damn it, like I gotta compete with the other long-haired guy who does the same thing I do. I am happy when there's other independent journalists at something, because if I miss something, then hopefully they've got it, or if they miss something, right? Like, I think that all of our work combined helps find the truth of a situation, and the Rittenhouse trial, while extremely unfortunate, in terms of the actual circumstances that lives were lost, I think that it's a good example of how all of these angles and voices can combine to find something closest to the truth. When you convert anything into a medium, it is changed by, and when I say convert into a medium, like recording, painting, writing about it, photographing it, you know, turning it into a memory. Right, like anything like that changes something into something that comes from a perspective, and truth, whatever absolute truth there was, you know, we can only aspire to get as close as we can to it. So the most and most complete angles that we have of all of that, you know, serves truth and serves history, and so I appreciate when there are more people who are trying to fight for that.
Man, spot on.
Mic drop.
I think we can agree, man.
Can we end the show now?
Right, really. So now we're gonna do the final closing statements.
Right.
So yeah, guys, thanks so much for
I got a
joining.
rebuttal.
I have 30 minutes.
Yeah, you each have 30 minutes, and
Like the prosecution and defense.
Actually, Ford's statement went over by 8 minutes.
Right.
So.
You
we
have to strike some minutes, and CJ didn't use a half an hour.
yeah, so I'm gonna take my full time in 8 minutes.
I'm reclaiming my time.
Yeah, right? Let out the lions. Let out the lions. Just let it happen. But you guys have been great, man. I really do appreciate it. And I guess we're probably gonna be on these streets. You know, I encourage locals here, like in Kenosha, come out and say hi. You know, introduce yourselves. I know we've gotten a ton of outpouring of support from people here that have found peace of mind knowing that there's other people out in these streets during a very tumultuous time here in Kenosha, specifically that we're in. That were able to connect themselves with a little peace of mind, like I said, knowing where safety was and where it wasn't, and gave them a firm understanding, much like you said, like Corey Elijah has been doing here in Kenosha for a long time. Big shout out to him.
What's up, Corey?
Yeah, Corey and all these other cats we're gonna see, Drew, all these other dudes that are out there. But it feels good to know that people here in Kenosha are so widely accepting of what we offer, which is that decentralized media, and like you said, an aspiration at trying to give the entirety of truth. So thank you guys, and thank you Kenosha for hosting all of us at this stage of the game. So and stay tuned. We'll see you soon. So again, Ford Fischer over here with News2Share. You got Brandon here with BG on the scene. You got he who will not be named. Kristan Harris here.
I'll kill the algorithms. Don't say my name.
Kristan Harris with the Rundown Live, and then CJTV here. CJ, myself, background. Big shout out to Shama here for helping on the production side of the back end. And again, look forward to seeing all of you out there in the streets. Take care and be good. Now I gotta try to close this out. The eloquent discharge of the stream. There we go.
I'm gonna try stopping it for you,
I
but.
got it.
I got like